Plus and the sharing economy as an excuse or means for cheating and manipulation. In this way, our purpose is to foster enabling environment for all entrepreneurs and provide our companies opportunities in developing new drivers of growth. In a word, there should be access to the market on equal footing, and there should be impartial regulation on part of the government. In market competition, the fittest will survive, and with impartial regulation, good rules will be enforced.
互联网经济、共享经济、平台经济还有很多发展空间。你就是电商、快递对农产品下乡，工业品下乡，农产品进城，它还可以起进一步搞活流通的作用。在工业领域推动工业互联网，可以把那些闲置的基础上带动起来，而且促进技术创新。在社会领域，用武之地就更大了，像互联网加医疗健康加养老助幼加教育，那可以连通许多方面尤其是让偏远地区农村的群众家庭孩子让他们能够享受到，或者是能够看得见，通过互联网看得见优质的学校、医院、优秀的教师、医生来帮他们解决实际的问题。这方面的例子就很多了，我看过不少互联网加医疗诊断加教育的实例，所以它本身也在释放着市场的活力和社会的创造力。
The Internet Plus and the sharing and platform economies have great roles to play in different facets of our industries and lives. For example, e-commerce and express delivery services have made it possible for industrial goods to reach rural areas and for quality agricultural produce to be delivered to urban households. In this process, we may also encourage technological innovation and put to better and more efficient use of idle production equipment. In the social sector, they have also made a difference. For example, they have enabled the sharing and connectivity of different medical, healthcare resources, educational resources, and other services so that even children and aged people and other populations living in rural, remote areas can find quality hospitals, doctors, teachers, and other resources accessible. There are many such concrete examples, and their development has further energized our market and unleashed public creativity.
谢谢。
谢谢，请继续提问。南区第3排这位女士，这位。
感谢总理好，我是来自香港凤凰卫视的记者。其实我的问题呢，还是继续有关于外商投资法，但是角度会有些不一样。因为我们特别关注到这个外商投资法当中，并没有涉及到港澳台的投资，我想这可能会让港澳台各界会有一些不太理解。另外，我也仔细听了你刚刚有关于对外开放的一些表述，其中没有谈到港澳台。这会不会表明中央政府在看待港澳台的地位，对待这个港澳台的投资上面会有一些调整呢？谢谢。
Phoenix TV, a question about foreign investment law, but from another perspective. I have noticed that the investment from Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan is not addressed in a foreign investment law. This may make some people from these 3 regions feel hard to understand. And in your comments about China's opening up, you also did not mention what measures would be adopted towards Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. Does that mean that there will be certain adjustment to the policies of the central government regarding the status of these 3 regions and investment from them?
香港和澳门呢是中华人民共和国的特别行政区，海峡两岸同属一个中国。我们历来高度重视港澳台的投资，港澳的境外到内地的投资，占我们利用境外投资的70%，能不重视吗？我们会进一步发挥好港澳作为单独关税区和自由港的作用。我刚才对台湾记者也说了，我们会为台胞来大陆投资兴业创造优惠的条件。
Hong Kong and Macau are China's special administrative regions, and the 2 sides of the Taiwan Strait belong to one and the same China. We have all along attached high importance to investment from these 3 regions. Investment from Hong Kong and Macau on the mainland accounts for 70% of all paid-in investment on the mainland. So how can we not set store by investment from these 2 regions? We will further harness the advantages of Hong Kong and Macau as separate customs territories and free ports. When I was addressing the question from a Taiwan journalist, I also said that we are going to create more favorable conditions for business people from Taiwan to invest on the mainland.
我这里要明确港澳台投资是可以参照或者比较适用刚刚通过的外商投资法，而且我们长期以来行之有效的一些制度安排和实际做法还要继续沿用，不仅不会影响，应该是有利于吸引港澳台的投资。国务院在制定有关法规或者推动制定有关政策性文件的过程当中，会认真听取港澳台同胞的关注意见，切实保护好他们的合法权益，也欢迎有更多的港澳台境外投资。谢谢。
The foreign investment law may be used as a reference in relation to investment from these 3 regions. Moreover, the institutional arrangements and actual practices that have long been in place and proven effective will go on and will not be affected. We hope that they will work to attract more investment from Hong Kong and policy documents. In this process, we will listen closely to the views of our fellow Chinese from Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan to see their lawful rights and interests duly protected. Investment from these 3 regions is most welcome. Thank you.
我查一下，这个时间过得很快，记者会的时间也差不多了，我看是不是请总理再回答最后2个问题，好吗？再给大家一些机会吧。
Time flies. Maybe 2 final questions.
好，中区第6排中间的那位男士。第6排，哎，对，这位男士。
感谢主持人，总理您好，我是中国日报的记者。那我们注意到呢，从去年开始，国内消费的增速出现了持续下滑的一个状态，可以说呢是内需不振。但是我们同时也看到有上亿的中国人走出国门到海外去消费。那么请问总理， 政府将会出台一些什么样的措施来进一步提振国内消费？谢谢。
China Daily. Last year, the growth of China's domestic consumption trended downward, and domestic demand was flagging. However, at the same time, hundreds of millions of Chinese chose to travel overseas for shopping. My question is, what measures will the government take to boost domestic consumption?
的确啊，一段时间以来，我国的消费出现增速放缓的趋势。消费啊和民生可以说是一个硬币的两面，需要合理的投资规模和消费的增长。当然，消费需要有收入支撑，但同时也要看到我们的消费当中啊，确实还存在着不少堵点，有些障碍，应该去解决，这样有利于消费，也有利于改善民生。
It is true that the growth of China's domestic consumption has been declining for some time. Consumption and people's well-being are like the two sides of the same coin. There needs to be a reasonable increase in investment and consumption. Consumption, although in a certain sense driven by increase in income, we should also recognize there are still obstacles that constrain the growth of domestic consumption that must be resolved. If we can further resolve these problems, it will also help improve people's lives.
比如这几年公路的出行运输不断增加，政府工作报告提出2年内要基本来取消省界的高速公路收费站，大家都很赞成。这样做啊，有利于来解决拥堵问题，也有利于许多产业的发展。这个目标我们确定了，但是我们要力争，也要求有关部门要提前实现。
We have seen an increase in travel by roads in recent years. In this year's government work report, we set the goal that within 2 years, we will eliminate almost all expressway toll booths at provincial borders. That has proven to be a very popular policy initiative. It will not just ease traffic congestion, but also help with the growth of many related industries. And in actual practice, we will endeavor to achieve this goal ahead of schedule.
比如，这几年我们连续在做，有利于消费者，其实也有利于产业的发展。今年要在过去的至20%，我让有关方面测算，他们要让利1800亿给消费者，还要求他们必须做到可以消费转网，这样去倒逼那些不明不白的套餐消费让我们的企业改善服务，也促进产业本身提质升级。
In recent years, we have also worked to raise the speed and cut the rates of internet services that has benefited our consumers and boosted the growth of related industries. This year, the goal is to cut the rates by another 20%, and that will involve some 180 billion RMB yuan. At the same time, we require that it should make possible for cell phone users to switch their telecommunication service carriers without changing their phone numbers. Time, our consumers should also be kept fully informed about those telecom service packages. This will force all our telecom carriers to further improve their services, and it will also help to upgrade the whole industry.
再比如，我们要今年再降工商电价10%，那不仅要让工业企业受惠啊，商业企业也同样。特别是我们现在电商有上千万家，6亿多消费用户，那个电商是24小时营业的。我去看过，他们说计算机耗电的费用压力不低啊，那降低了就可以让利给消费者，也可以促进产业的发展，这是一举多得的事情。
We also plan to cut the prices of electricity for general industrial and commercial companies by 10% this year. When it comes to e-commerce platforms, there are some up to 10 million in China with 600 million users. And e-commerce platforms run 24/7, and these computers consume of electricity. So the price is cut for it will also help make it possible for to update.
其实
been listening to Li Keqiang there speaking in that very lengthy conference in the Chinese capital. We will have a full wrap-up of everything that he's had to say coming up. Eunice Yoon, who has been listening. Let's give you a look at how the Asian markets are trading right now. We have, of course, had the China markets in the last 56 minutes or so. They will reopen at the top of the next hour. So in around 5 minutes or so, showing a very strong performance. Composite is the Hang Seng firmer by about 1%, just closing market well up percent. The Bank of Japan holding policy steady at the conclusion of its two-day meeting. That news coming out during this NPC press conference. Short-term interest rate target maintained at 0.1%, but it has weakened the tone of its assessment of overseas. Looking back at China, Li Keqiang's speech at the National People's Congress and talk about what it means for the US-China trade deal. We've got plenty coming up, so stick around.
Some of the world banks are feeling the slowdown.
My view is really a temporary slowdown.
Even though the economists say growth, the stock market are telling us something.
It's going to be very bumpy. Isn't so clear. Basically, the return.
If you're a strong company, you'll be able to get out even in a more volatile environment.
Is that money moving? Because they're going to be exposed to a recession.
Doesn't mean that a recovery, because it's gone through a certain amount of time.
The month of December was really kind of strange.
I don't see, any recession.
CEOs aren't very good at kind of looking 18 months, 36 months out and saying, what if?
We're going to have a recession one day where adult stability is brought a bit out.
On the next man plan.
Now, let's go and do something about it now. There won't be that many next generations to survive our generation. If you were to integrate the environment, then our buildings and our cities, not
In architect next.
It's just the.
This is the first new asset class in decades.
The issues right now are regulation.
To learn about.
One more tweet of Proctor for you.
There's great opportunity.
We're seeing every industry jump into this.
There are scams, and our job is to educate viewers about all of this.
I'm not sure that this is actually a blockchain company.
Strong end to the week, but let's get you some of your headlines this hour. Fighting the slowdown, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang outlines plans to support China's slowing economy as he also promises to open up the country and protect foreign investors. Brexit bound for a delay. An overwhelming majority of UK MPs vote in favour of asking the EU for more time to nail down a withdrawal agreement. But how long? This seems the key question. And a developing story we are following out of New Zealand. Police say multiple people are dead following an attack on 2 mosques in Christchurch. The Prime Minister calling this one of New Zealand's darkest days. Welcome back to the program. Let's give you a look at how the Asian markets are tracking, and it does look as though it will be a fairly happy Friday out there. We have markets right across the region enjoying gains. The Australian market just closing out for trade. Japan up by a nice 1%. We did have the BOJ out in the last little while as well, maintaining its policy, holding policy steady at the conclusion of its 2-day meeting. You can see the Singapore market is higher by about 1/3 of 1%. The Kospi up by about 3/4 of 1%. Markets in Great China just coming from the lunch break, and we are seeing a very strong performance across Chinese equities. The Shanghai Composite before the conclusion of the lunch break up by about 1.5%. You can see the Hong Kong market firmer by around about 0.9%. Let's get out to Emily Tan in Hong Kong, who's going to get us up to speed on all the movers in the Hong Kong market. Hi, Emily.
Hi there, Matt, and lots of support coming through for the Chinese markets as we snap 2 sessions of losses, so by more than 1.5%. Now, this comes as we're seeing the wrap up of the National People's Congress, the most important parliamentary annual meeting, and the government reiterating their commitment to boosting growth in the economy, and Beijing and Washington appearing to have made more progress in their trade talks. So that's helping to support the markets, and we're looking at the level here with the Shenzhen 1% or 260 points. To some stocks that we're looking at, the Macau gaming space, SJM and MGM China. Both of these stocks were suspended for 2 hours in the morning session after 10 o'clock, suspended and then now resuming trade, and a very nice pop-up here, up 5.6%. MGM China up 6.25%. This comes as the Macau government has approved their request to extend their gaming concessions that were due to expire in March of next year. Now, this has been extended to June 26, 2022, and this would with the other 4 Macau gaming operators, and this would basically mean that all 6 of them will now expire in 20, and this will allow for the preparations for that re-extension, or what I should say, a new tender by international players for the new all at once. So the Macau government is saying that each of these players, being these 2, SJM and MGM China, have to pay $24.7 million to the government in compensation for the extension to 2022, June 26. As a whole, very, very strong today. So it's not just these plays, but the likes of Wynn Macau up almost 5%. Sands China also seeing some nice gains. We got SJM shares up about 5.5%. Matt, it's back to you.
Emily, thank you very much for that. Well, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang taking questions from the media as the National People's Congress does come to a close. He spoke about everything from US-China trade talks to how Beijing is working to steady the world's number 2 economy. He said the economy is facing downward pressure. Strong measures are needed. He said the government will push ahead with slashing from the 1st of April, May 1st. The Premier said China can use the RRR and interest rate cuts, but
we must keep our policies stable and ensure their access and growth, broaden market access, and level the playing field for all market players.
Well, lots to digest. Let's get to our reporter in China, our correspondent Eunice Yoon, who's been listening in. Eunice, what are the key highlights there?
Well, Matt, I think you hit the nail on the head with one of the main highlights, which is that much of the focus really was on economic issues and ways in which China could help stabilize the economy. At the very start of the National People's Congress, the premier had outlined some of the concerns about the slowdown, the headwinds that he saw, lowering the growth target for the year to between 6 and 6.5%. So he said one of the biggest tools that the government would be using to try to help stabilize growth would be to cut taxes as well as other fees. Now, in addition to the economy, he had mentioned the trade dispute with the United States, saying that he hoped that the two sides would be able to differences in both trade and technology. This is what he said.
中美作为两大经济体啊，
China and the United States, as two large economies, have become closely entwined through years of growing their relationship and years of cooperation. It is realistic nor possible to decouple these two economies. I believe we need to continue to follow the principles of cooperation before confrontation, mutual respect, equality, and mutual benefit to continue to grow China-US relationship, including their economic and trade ties, to deliver concrete benefits to people of the two countries.
And in an unusual move, the premier addressed specifically some worries that Beijing could use technology made by Chinese firms such as Huawei to spy on other countries. He said, "Let me tell you explicitly that this is not consistent with Chinese law. This is not how China behaves. We did not do that and will not do that in the future." Despite some of those differences, though, he says that he does hope that the two sides will be able to produce a positive result in the trade talks. Now, beyond that, one of the big events today was the passage of the new foreign investment law. And this is what the premier said about Beijing's intentions.
新的负面清单。
We opened up for foreign investment. We will also enhance protection of intellectual property. In this respect, we will propose to make revisions to relevant laws governing intellectual property protection. We will introduce a mechanism of punitive compensation to ensure that all infringements of intellectual property will be seriously dealt with, and such infringements will have nowhere to hide.
And Matt, one of the reasons why there's been so much attention on this new investment law is because there were some last-minute changes that were introduced in the draft law that seem to directly address some of the concerns that the Trump administration has about the way some of the products enter into this country. So one of the long-standing American as well as European companies and Western companies in general has been that when they want to introduce a new product here or open a factory, that they go up against government-led review boards. And these review boards sometimes on the board. And so really seen as a way from many American officials and other officials for China to extract proprietary information out of foreign companies. And so this change is seen as a very welcome one, though, of course, as is always the case in China, we have to wait to see what the implementation of these laws are.
And Eunice, let's keep talking about the US-China trade talks, because there's been a lot of speculation, but no official confirmation that a summit between President Trump and Xi will take place at the end of the month. Now it seems that it may not happen until at least April. What are you hearing?
Well, it looks as though it's going to be delayed. So President Trump had mentioned that this could take another 3 to 4 weeks. Also, Secretary Steven Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, of course, in the United States, has said overnight that he believed that this deal might not happen right away, but that the two sides are working in good faith to make progress. And in addition to that, this morning, we had heard through the state media that Secretary Mnuchin, as well as the Trade Representative Ron Lighthizer, has been in close contact with the Vice Premier Liu He in order to try to move things along. So might not be happening right now, but it looks as though both sides are hoping that this summit, and indeed the trade deal, does finish at some point relatively soon.
Eunice, stick around. Let's bring in our next guest and you can join in on the conversation. Tommy She is head of Greater China Research at OCBC Bank. Is with me here at the SGX. Thanks very much. You've been listening to what the Premier has been saying, what Eunice has been telling us about some of those key themes to come out of this media conference today. Anything you heard out of the Premier which changes your outlook on China based on what he said today?
Well, I think some of the thing he mentioned today, which is quite similar what he delivered on the 5th of March during the opening speech. So basically, we are expecting more monetary policy easing and the fiscal policy support. But of course, he actually answered one of the concerns from the market because, as we know, China is running the higher the tax cuts. But the question is because the increase of the fiscal deficit is not that much. So the question is, how are you going to finance this tax cut? So I think that's one of the key concerns. I think which he actually addressed the concern. I think basically we're going to see more support for SOE companies. They're going to transfer some of the profits to the central government to support this kind of fiscal policy, and also revitalization of the money in the local government front, which is to support all the expenditure or all the tax cut initiatives. So that's, to me, is very
tightening its belt due to the tax cuts. Can they afford to be giving out tax cuts? Because we know that there are concerns about indebtedness in China.
Yes, I mean, for my personal opinion, that I think it's possible for them to do that because actually China published the total net assets owned by the state government. This is huge, massive numbers. So I think according to the Chinese government owns around 9 trillion net assets. So that actually become one of the very important weapons right now for China if they want to really push ahead with the fiscal policies.
Let's talk about those growth numbers. Of course, between 6 and 6.5% is what we're expecting to see over 2019. Gone through some of the support measures that the government is going to enact to get them to those numbers. Where do you think the number is going to come in? Is it going to be more towards 6 or more towards 6.5%? Because they're not going to want to shock everyone out there and the number, comes in on the low side.
Well, I think it's probably in the middle of the range. So, I mean, there's one constraint right now to China's states. As we know, now they're targeting 6 to 6.5% growth target for this year. But there's another constraint which is previous commitment made by the Chinese government. They want to double the GDP by 2020 from the 2010 level. So in order to achieve that, the 6.2% for next 1 to 2 years. So that could be another magic number for us to watch out for, which is 6.2. So which is possible with China to achieve GDP targets.
All right, let's talk about the trade negotiations. Of course, that's the other big thing hanging over China right now. You just heard Yoon saying that it's likely they're going to be delayed out to April. Do you think it's a sign that, yes, they are continuing to hold discussions? It might be taking a little bit longer, but it looks as though we may have now an April deadline to contend with.
Yeah, I would say it's good and bad, right? I mean, which means there's a lot of discrepancy right now between the two nations. That's why they need a lot more time to reach the consensus. But on the note, which means both sides are quite serious to reach. That's why I think delay to April could be one of the better scenario. I think eventually what's important for the trade between China and the US is still whether this deal can be enforceable or not. I think that's probably the most important part. So how are they going to make sure that China is going to enforce all the commitments?
Bank. Well, we want to get you up to speed now on another developing story that we are watching out of New Zealand, and 4 people are in custody after a shooting at 2 mosques in the city of Christchurch. Police say there are multiple fatalities. Witnesses tell local media military-style camouflage outfits similarly at people with an automatic rifle. To the New Zealand Police Commissioner, she says he's unsure if there are other locations under threat, but that they can't presume the danger has gone. Investigators have also found vehicles with explosives attached to them, and they say they're not assuming that the attacks are contained just to Christchurch. The New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has called this one of New Zealand's darkest days.
Many of those who will have been directly affected by the shooting may be migrants to New Zealand. They may even be refugees here. They have chosen to make New Zealand their home, and it is home. They are us. The person who has perpetuated this violence against us is not. They have no place in New Zealand.
You are watching Capital Connection. We will be right back after this very short break.
world's most powerful marketers.
Digital is changing the way you're doing marketing.
Storytelling is dead, but it's all going to be about story making.
I'm asking my marketeers to think mobile first.
The world's most famous brands.
Fantastic customer experience will drive the loyalty.
Sports works. It's a great way to engage a consumer.
How we reach our audience in new and different ways today is critical.
Join the conversation and be part of Marketing Media Money.
We're here in China's seat of power, the Great Hall of the People behind me. National, the most powerful seen in 50 years since Mao Zedong. We're already seeing the most sweeping changes of governance in 25 years. We want to know what that means to foreign investors. CNBC has Rose.
New York's iconic Waldorf Astoria was purchased by a Chinese company in 2014 for nearly $2 billion. After the acquisition, President Obama stopped staying here due to security concerns, breaking with the decades-long tradition of U.S. presidents staying here during their trips to New York. The move was highly symbolic of Chinese money flowing into the U.S.
Chinese investments include 28 Liberty Street,
$1 million to buy this Midtown skyscraper in 2014.
In 2016, Chinese investment into the U.S. hit a high.
The next year, though, it declined significantly, reversing the trend.
Just take a look at the China Investment Monitor, which tracks Chinese direct investment into the United States. The figures have generally been on an upward trend since the tracker was launched in 2000, peaking at nearly $46 billion in 2016. Then investments dropped off.
To the show. Well, a fairly positive Friday to end out, of course, the trading week. Let's bring in Adrian Zerka, CIO at UBS, joining me here at the SGX. Nice rally we're seeing into the close here across many Asian markets this Friday. What's your strategy when it comes to broadly the Asian markets right now? Because it has been a fairly choppy week yet again.
Well, we're still overweight Asian markets. We bought them end of last year. It's a very strong rally indeed, but we don't think it has to be the end of the rally. So we still have a few positive factors that could show up. Definitely, if you look at valuation, the undervalued stocks have been repriced to fair value, but it could also go above that over the next couple of weeks. For example, on the trade side, there could be some positive aspects if they finally find a deal. And I think what the market could surprise if the US would agree to some of the implemented tariffs on China. We also expect that some of the macro numbers that are still coming in rather on the weak side should start to turn around in the second quarter, and that could lift sentiment. And then last but not least, still see analysts downgrading their earnings. But once you probably see a bit stronger footing on the macro side, also these analysts could start to upgrade some of these earnings, and that could really drive the market higher from here.
Okay, so you see it around in some of this patches we're seeing when it comes to the global economic growth story, perhaps riding in the second quarter. There are some that we've been speaking to that suggested it could be more towards the back end of 2019, but you perhaps see an improvement in the data story sooner than that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did quite a lot of analysis on how this trade war could actually play out. You have some indication from early January last year on the washing machine side, and we really can see that these higher tariffs or implemented tariffs are working for the economies around 6-7 months. So going back to the additional 50 billion and 200 billion that the US implemented on China, we think actually, particularly on the US side, the worst is over. So we definitely saw that investment sentiment has plummeted in December, but actually slowly recovering. Now, to see this in macro numbers probably takes another 1 or 2 months, and the same for China. I think we slowly see policy support that is coming through, more investment coming through, sentiment is picking up, and that also should somehow show up in some of the better macro numbers over the next couple of months.
Talking about some macro numbers, this week we had some numbers out of Japan which showed core machinery orders were fairly weak when it came to the print that we got out. BOJ out today, not doing anything when it comes to policy, steady at the conclusion of that two-day meeting, maintaining the short-term interest rate target, promising to continue buying JGBs. What's your outlook for the Japanese economy? Does that differ from your analysis of other economies through Asia?
Well, Japan is very trade dependent, of course, open economy. So what you can see now in the trade data, export that is also depending on China, not just on the US, on both sides, are still weak. But BOJ haven't done anything today and probably not over the next 1 or 2 months. But in 2019, we'll start to end the quantitative easing or massively reduce that at this stage. And so it's one of our in 2019.
Because you do have some shocks coming with the Japanese economy, like the implement of the consumption tax as well. Order outlook for Japan?
Well, I mean, particularly on the tax, usually it's inflationary, right? So, and that's what we're basically looking at in Japan. So one of the issues that BOJ is monitoring is the inflation. So that's one aspect that we probably see a bit of stronger inflation data coming in, and that gives us confidence that actually the BOJ should start to move towards a more neutral policy over the course of the next few months.
All right, you just mentioned the yen that you that is undervalued. When you look at investments away from equities, is there anything else that looks attractive? EM currencies or commodities, anything else?
Well, on the commodity side, we still think, or our colleagues from the commodity team still think that oil actually can trade higher. Some of the cuts that actually should come from the Iran side. If the economy is picking up, demand naturally is picking up. So that's definitely a trade that we're still looking at, and it's interesting. And this is EM currencies and probably Asian currencies start to look more attractive. Fed is going on, and we think there will be no interest rate, so like more from the Fed, and that probably could give a bit of a boost to Asian currency, in particular some of the high-yielding names.
To chat to us this Friday, we really appreciate it. Adrian Zerker there from UBS. Thanks very much. Coming up after the break, it's been less than a month since that high-profile second Trump-Kim summit, and now we're getting reports that North Korea could be set to abandon the US altogether. We'll get you all the latest on that story live with Sherry right after the break.
Yes, they have come out with how shares are trading. They are about 3.4% lower.
If I look at the overall year, almost asset classes basically in the world lost value, which is quite extraordinary. The strategic choices we made in the past and
for Santander through 2019. State in Brazil. If Brazil gets the pension reform approved, you could see 10 years of growth in Brazil at 3-4%.
Roche has forecast low to mid-digit growth for core earnings this year.
We are only at the beginning, so I see continued growth from the new medicines.
The bank is actually not driven by itself, it's driven by speculations, and those speculations are not going away.
We control our own fate, and we've been, as we demonstrated, frankly, in 2018, and emerge, I think, stronger.
Mobile One, the grid. News, views, and the very best of the action from motorsports across the world. Formula One, NASCAR, IndyCar, and more. Mobile One, the grid. Weekends on CNBC Sports.
The journey from the brink of war to the negotiating table has been stunningly swift.
That is fire being pushed by the wind. Our expert said we simply can't go any farther.
You had made the decision before they came in.
I was going to fire Tom.
What's it like flying into the hurricane zones in terms of what you're seeing out the window?
It's pretty bad. I've never seen anything like it.
I mean,
it's dangerous. It's critical.
Welcome back to Capital Connection. Let's take a look at how the South Korean markets are Friday. Certainly looks like it's going to end on a positive note, but hugely negative reaction coming through for the Korean won, although it did come back up a little bit. Currently trading at 1137.5 against the US dollar. This comes after Russia's TASS agency reported North Korea's vice foreign ministry's comments saying that the regime is considering pulling out of the nuclear talks with the United States. And of course, this coming out of a news conference in the capital city of Pyongyang. And as you can see, the Korean won showing quite a bit of weakness across other currencies as well. North Korea exposed stocks under a lot of steep declines coming through because this means that North Korea and South Korea working together on some kind of economic cooperation project is becoming more of a scenario. In the meantime, South Korea's defense stocks getting a huge pop on the back of this headline. And do note that the Associated Press followed up on that, carrying similar reports as well. So huge, moves coming through after those reports, really the aftermath of the New Deal Hanoi summit late last month. In the meantime, we've got some action coming through in Japanese yen as well. Yes, it did come down a little bit, but lots of bullish bets for the safe haven currency as well. So taking a look at the daily chart, really that dip that you're seeing right in the middle of the chart is when we're getting that report as well. And of course, that has to do with the markets thinking of increased geopolitical tensions. So Matt, certainly an interesting, a very dramatic market reaction on the back of those reports. Back to you.
Sherry, thank you very much for that. Well, still to come on Capital Connection, with a delay on the cards, the UK's divorce with the EU remains as uncertain as ever. We'll be live in Westminster and also Brussels with the very latest on all the Brexit drama when we come back after this break.
How about that? Though we never found the winner circle in 2018, Tony Finau's season was nothing short of spectacular. Ranking inside the top 30 in the FedEx Cup standings every week, Finau collected almost a dozen top 10 finishes, including 3 runner-ups, on his way to finishing 6th in the final FedEx Cup standings.
It's been a great year. It's been a solid year for me and definitely my most consistent season. It's been a lot of fun.
The Edge brings you the most exciting technology and groundbreaking innovation.
We expect to mass deploy them into hundreds of millions of devices.
From startups to the world's biggest businesses.
The opportunity to actually monetize the relationship with customers is going to be higher than it's ever been.
You, my friend, have gone from analog to digital.
We reveal the disruptors of the future.
This gives us the ability to charge 1,000 times faster than what you can do in lithium-ion batteries.
The Edge, only on CNBC.
We cover brands like Bugatti, Patek Philippe, the best of the best, because we are all about money in every sense, how to make it, how to invest it, and how to spend it wisely. As a reporter, I'm looking for how these companies are trying to attract the toughest consumers on the planet. It's like having a leather seat with a jet engine strapped to your back. CNBC has the most affluent audience in telling their minds, but we also want to make their hearts race.
Let's get you a quick check on sterling in Asian trade right now. We're sitting at 132.35, the pound retreating from its 9-month high that it, of course, hit earlier this week after UK lawmakers voted overwhelmingly to delay Britain's exit from the European Union. This means that the March 29th departure deadline will likely be missed. The delay could last until the 30th of June, but currently there is no time limit. Prime Minister Theresa May is set to face Parliament again next week, where the same lawmakers will vote on her now twice rejected divorce bill. Meantime, JP Morgan out with a fresh poll on Brexit today. It has raised the possibility or the probability of another referendum to 20% from 15%, and the probability of a national election in the UK to 15% from 10% previously. The bank reduced the probability of an exit on the current terms of Prime Minister May's deal, and it seems the probability of a long extension of the departure date at 20%, that they're remaining unchanged. Well, let's get out to our Brexit team this morning. Sylvia Amaro is in Brussels for the European reaction there. But first, let's head out to Willem Marx, who's at Westminster again for us. And where to from here? Now, spell out the timeline for us.
So last night's vote was a free vote. We saw cabinet ministers, including the Brexit secretary, actually voting against the government motion. In that motion, there were details about what Theresa May plans to do. And as you mentioned, yet another meaningful vote on the deal she's negotiated with Brussels. Now, what MPs also voted for before that main motion last night were against a second referendum, that was non-binding. They also voted against themselves, process very narrowly. And they also voted against the idea that they would hold a series of votes to try and flesh out where there was a majority. So uncertainty is still very much the name across everyone's lips here. But in terms of the reaction to the vote here last night, Jeremy Corbyn once again standing at the dispatch box criticising the Prime Minister, even though MPs had refused to take control of the process. He once again criticised her approach and called for greater consensus in the Houses of Parliament.
All of us now have the opportunity and the responsibility to work together to find a solution to the crisis facing this country, where the government has so dramatically failed to do so. We've begun to hold meetings with members across the House to find a consensus and a compromise that meets the needs of this country. But the last few days have also put a responsibility on the Prime Minister. First, to publicly accept that both her deal and no deal are simply no longer viable options.
So we should, again, in the next couple of days, hear from Theresa May about her own plans for the way forward. We could get that third, quote, meaningful vote as early as Tuesday. So the race is going to be on to try and get some of these rebellious Conservative MPs and members of the small Northern Irish party that props up Conservative government here, the DUP, on board with Theresa May's plan, Matt.
That's exactly the question then, Willem. How will the government try and persuade these rebellious MPs that have already knocked back this deal twice to support it the third time around, where essentially there aren't going to be any changes, really?
You can think of it as a carrot and a stick approach, Matt. If you have a carrot, it's about the legal advice. You remember Monday night, Theresa May made that last-ditch travel to Strasbourg, trying to win some kind of legal clarification from the European side about the Northern Irish backstop, this very thorny issue. The following morning, her Attorney General, Geoffrey Cox, stood up and said, you know what, I don't think this changes anything meaningfully. And that was essentially the death knell for that second meaningful. If they can find an alternative legal interpretation of some of those documents signed with the Europeans to try and persuade both Conservatives and DUP that this will not be a long-term trap for the UK, that might be the carrot approach. The stick, and this is part of the motion that we saw voted on last night, is Theresa May's essential threat that she won't have control of how long this extension period will be. She'll go to Brussels next week. She'll ask for, in her view, 3 months if her deal gets through, a technical extension. If it doesn't get through, though, she says she has no control over how long the Europeans will insist on. And that could be something that really concerns those very much in favour of a quick exit.
We will wait and see. Willem, thank you very much for joining us there. Well, now, of course, the UK may have voted to delay Brexit, but the big question, you agree, European Council President Donald Tusk likely skeptic MPs in the UK by saying he'll ask the EU27 to be open to a long extension. Let's go out live now to Sylvia. Agree to this extension?
Exactly the big question. Will the EU27 countries say yes to a request for extending Article 50? And the second big question is, under which circumstances. Now, we're going to have a very important summit next week here in Brussels on Thursday. 27 European leaders will gather and discuss Brexit, and it is expected that in that summit they will outline the details of what an extension could look like. As you mentioned, yesterday we heard from President Donald Tusk, President of the European Council, that is, saying that he's going to suggest to the 27 European heads of state to discuss a long extension. A European official told me here yesterday that a long extension is not defined, but it's perceived to be of about a year. Now, we heard from different capitals after that statement from Donald Tusk. In Lisbon, for instance, the Minister for Foreign Affairs said that a long extension is preferable to one. And the reason is that a short extension, if we have Article 50 delayed only until June, it's going to suggest that the problem is technical, and that's not the case. The problem is much bigger than that. And we also heard from Luxembourg, the Prime Minister there, saying that it's not time to keep calm and drink tea. The EU wants a clear reason from the UK and Article 50.
I think you need something perhaps a little bit stronger than tea when it comes to all of this backward and forward. Sylvia, thank you very much for joining us. Coming up after the break, Malaysia Airlines says it's reviewing its overall Boeing 737 MAX program as the plane remains grounded around the world, and investigators try to find out definitively what caused the jet to crash last weekend in Ethiopia. We'll bring you an update on that story. Plus, our Dan Murphy speaks exclusively to the chairman and CEO of DP World about the risks the port operator is wrestling with this year. That's coming up as well.
Everyone thought, right, no deal Brexit, off the table. Yeah, hey, we're off to the races on Sunday. I can't say it enough, and I've said it all week. It is not off the table by any way, shape or means. It is expression of will. It is an expression of opinion.
Now inevitable that we'll get an extension of Article 50, do you think?
I think it's inevitable that we'll ask for one. If it's just kicking the can down the road, I think the Europeans would be pretty justified in saying no.
It's very different, for the slightly older guys, but the standard is incredible. The scores that the guys shoot are unbelievable for the course. The course is still very, very difficult, very challenging. There's 3 rounds, 2 per round. So it's busy in a different sort of way. But as soon as Friday comes along and the tournament starts, it's the same as playing out the regular. So, the guys play unbelievably well, and everybody wants to beat everybody else.
Welcome, everyone, to the closing bell.
It's the most important hour of the trading day.
20 minutes to go before the close.
Do you think the volatility is going to stay with us?
Stocks move when volume spikes.
A story that everybody on
Keeping you on the leading edge of what's driving the markets.
While stocks reverse course, there are still risks ahead.
Minute by minute.
Things have changed in the last couple of weeks.
Wilfred Frost.
Final vote on her Brexit plan.
Sarah Eisen.
A crazy day on Wall Street.
Closing bell. Weeknights on CNBC.
We have a dedicated real estate feed. We're the only one on TV who do. Real estate coverage has absolutely changed since the financial crisis. We've tried to tell you what it's going to mean to you as an investor, as a homeowner. The existing home sales report is the most important number of the month. Existing home sales down 2.8%. The minute we report this number, anything that touches housing, those stocks move. CNBC keeps an eye on every number in the housing market because it tells us where the economy's going.
Malaysia Airlines says it is reviewing its overall Boeing 737 MAX program. It doesn't operate the controversial jet, order for around 25 of them. Boeing shares down again overnight, off by around 11% this week after nations around the world grounded that 737 MAX in the wake of that crash in Ethiopia. Second fatal accident involving the jet in less than 5 months. NBC's Tom Costello has more.
At airports nationwide, every 737 MAX sat out the day after one last non-passenger trip. Without the MAX in their fleet, Southwest had canceled 39 flights, American 85, and passengers potentially affected.
When I heard that it was canceled, I was like, oh, great. We're
going to still be able to get on a plane, but a different plane that should be safer.
Meanwhile, in Paris, investigators have now received the black boxes badly damaged from the Ethiopian airliner that crashed. Ethiopia chose France as a neutral third party since Boeing is an American company. The FAA says there are similarities with the Lion Air MAX 8 crash in Indonesia last October. Satellite data shows that plane experienced erratic vertical speed readings after taking off, up and down for 7 minutes, climbing at 1,500 feet per minute, then descending at 1,500 feet per minute. Data from the Ethiopian plane is similar, up and down, then up again, over a very volatile 2 minutes. The FAA also says it found new evidence in the Ethiopian wreckage. Investigators looking closely at the position of the jack screw that moves the stabilizer on the tail could indicate if the nose of the plane was being forced down, much like Lion Air.
The flight recorder, cockpit voice recorder data is absolutely critical to understanding what happened in Ethiopia and if there is commonality with the Lion Air tragedy.
Still, the FAA remains under fire for only grounding the plane after every other country in the world acted first. Did your close relationship with Boeing and with the airlines in any way lead you to delay the decision to ground these planes?
Absolutely not. We're linked to them for safety. 100% we're linked to them for safety. And that's the conversations that I have with the carriers since Sunday. But other than that, there is no linkage.
Meanwhile, at the crash scene, anguished families gathered again today to remember the 157 lives lost.
Well, let's back to the markets now and turn our attention to the Middle Eastern markets. It was a mixed close in that region yesterday, with the Abu Dhabi index ending the week with its biggest one-day gain in almost 3 years, up by 3.7%. Qatar as well rebounding up for the week in positive territory, 2% higher, with the blue chip financials leading the gains. They're going in the opposite direction. Dubai sinking by about 1%, with financials dragging the index there lower. Meantime, port operator DP World's annual profits rising over 10%, largely driven by acquisitions. This comes despite the geopolitical headwinds and threats to global trade. Well, Dan Murphy spoke exclusively to the group's chair and CEO about what growth.
We have shown that we have a strong balance sheet. We've shown that we know how to invest very well. And we are able to create cargo for our customers, shipping line our customers, and we are able to create cargo. We are able to mobilize cargo for our customers to use. We're not anymore handling cargo. We're creating cargo. I think that is something that we learned.
Just on the issue of trade, President Trump said this week that he's in no rush to strike a deal with China. And he even said that he'd be happy to essentially walk away if he wasn't happy with what he saw. So how is that uncertainty impacting the business, and how are you operating in this environment of great unknowns?
My opinion is they're going to be a deal. It has to be. They will. It's always with Trump. Don't listen to what he says. Look what he does. He threatened Mexico. He signed with Mexico. He threatened Canada. He signed with Canada. In Europe, and he signed with Europe. China is a giant, major investor in America, big market for American products. Chinese market is not as open as American market, and Trump is a businessman. And they negotiate, they'll come out with a deal.
And DP World is a great enabler of global trade.
Absolutely.
So how is this impacting the business? Do you see further near-term headwinds as a result of these uncertainties, or are you confident that this will get resolved? What does success look like on the trade?
We see that it's going to be resolved. Whatever China cannot supply to America, China is going to supply to somebody else. And whatever somebody else is not going to supply it somewhere else, they're going to take it to America. I mean, it's all will balance. People will always trade. People will always buy from each other. And trading allows people to have a comparative advantage, create value. Yet, I understand where Trump is coming from. Trump wants a fair trade. Trump believes that free trade does not treat the United States fairly. It's a fair argument. Anytime you open the market, it's good. But in these negotiations, we see threats.
Let's give you a check on the oil markets now. Stick with that region, and you can see we've got the NYMEX contract sitting pretty flat, 58.61. When it comes to Brent We are seeing only the smallest decline by 1 cent, 67.22. OPEC has lowered its forecast for demand following its monthly report. It's now 30.46 million barrels per day to 130,000 barrels. OPEC also reiterated the importance of its strategy to boost global oil prices, withholding 1.2 million barrels per day. And it seems to be working as oil prices have risen by around 20% since the start of the year. We're off for another short break. Still to come, though, on Capital Connection, the US SEC suing VW and its former CEO over the Dieselgate scandal. We'll have those details for you after the break.
How Vista Jet in the Vista Global Crew will grow into 2020. So a lot of great product coming into the marketplace. And again, I believe with this product, we will be 2 years ahead of anybody else competing on that Global 7500.
CNBC covers retail because it's about so much more than just shopping. 2/3 of the domestic economy is powered by consumer spending. You have to look at earnings to talk to analysts. You count shopping bags when you're walking down the streets. Black Friday it once was. Cyber Monday may be growing in importance, but they're both very significant. Black Friday online is topping Adobe's even very bullish expectations. CNBC's focus is financial news and the economy. Retail plays a key part in both of those.
Technology only matters if it makes a difference in the guest experience.
Ford Talks with John Ford. Subscribe to the podcast now.
Welcome back to the show. Well, let's stick with the autos now. Tesla unveiling its latest crossover SUV, the Model Y. Elon Musk announcing the electric SUV will be available sometime in 2021 and will cost around about $39,000. The Model Y will be built on the same platform as the Model 3, and the long-range version will have a range of about 300 miles, priced at $47,000. The Tesla CEO also announcing that he expects the company to have made about 1 million vehicles in 12 months. Elsewhere, keep an eye on shares of Volkswagen today at the open. The US SEC announced it's suing VW and its former CEO, Martin Winterkorn, over the German automaker's diesel emissions scandal known as Dieselgate. The commission accuses VW of carrying out a massive fraud on American investors. It's focused on $13 billion in bonds and asset-backed securities VW issued on US markets between April 2014 and May 2015. The SEC says they did this even though senior executives knew many VW vehicles were illegal when it comes to that emissions story. Let's stick with another story. Hong Kong's securities regulator, though, is banning 4 investment banks for due diligence failures in their role of overseeing several Hong Kong IPOs. UBS and Morgan Stanley are shouldering the bulk of the fines, as Emily Tan reports.
Hong Kong securities regulators has fined the 4 investment banks with a record $100 million fine for failing in their duties as IPO sponsors. The brokerages include UBS, Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, and Standard Chartered. And the penalties are to do with their work on 3 listings, namely China Forestry, which came online in 2009 but collapsed 2 years after listing, Tianhe Chemicals, debuting in Hong Kong in 2014, but the stock has remained under suspension since 2015. And the third was an unnamed company as investigations are continuing. UBS bearing the brunt of these fines, $47.7 million for its involvement in the China Forestry IPO. The bank was also banned from sponsoring IPOs for 1 year, and one of its ex-bankers also having his license suspended for 2 years. Morgan Stanley and Merrill Lynch must pay damages for their involvement in the Tianhe Chemicals IPO. The SFC says the sanctions send a strong message to the market that it will not hesitate to hold errant sponsors accountable for misconduct. And this is certainly a wake-up call to banks in a town with a very active IPO market, and holds the crown for IPO funds raised in 2018, totaling more than $36 billion US. I'm Emily Tan in Hong Kong. Back to you.
Let's give you a look at how the European opening calls are shaping up. It's, of course, been a positive Friday here in Asia, and we do have markets around Europe looking as though they will open in positive territory, with the exception of the Spanish market, with the IBEX called down by just about 4 points or so. Let's get you to our wake-up call this morning. Thanos Papasavas is founder and CIO at ABP Invest, joining us now line from London. Looks as though it will be a positive day for equities. What are you going to be watching most closely, and how to trade this positivity as we head into the Friday session in Europe?
Good morning, Matt. Yes, indeed, there's going to be a positive sentiment. I think this is the continuation from the earlier on in the year. If we see at the signs, the broader two economies, the U.S. economy is in our view doing well. There is no risk of recession until 2021. Even more importantly than that, from China, which has been the driver of sentiment over the last few months, we have clear commitment there from both a fiscal and a monetary stimulus, should it be required, to ensure soft landing. So both of these sentiments seem to be positive for the markets.
Okay, is there a favoured equity market that you've got when it comes to either continental Europe or also the UK? It looks as though there's been a little bit of a resolution when it comes to the Brexit story, with the Article 50 essentially being delayed. What do you like on UK markets, or are you avoiding them until we get a more definitive resolution on Brexit?
Well, I'm certainly avoiding them in terms of the currency. I'm neutral on the currency side, slightly more cautious. I do believe that Prime Minister May will put this through. I believe that her two sticks, one of a threat of a Corbyn government, the second of a people's referendum, will at the last stage pull them through and be able to extend a short delay until the end of June in order to finalize negotiations. What I believe the market's missing out, and certainly in terms of sterling, is the true potential risk of the Corbyn government coming in with a majority. That, to me, is the worst case sterling scenario. It is not a no-deal Brexit. It's a majority Corbyn government.
What would be a good level then to get in on the sterling? If you're saying it's a little bit toppy at the moment, what level would be an attractive entry point for you?
I think back below 130s, around the sort of 125, 127s, I think it would be closer to fair value, taking into consideration those risks. But I also tend to look at it more importantly versus the euro, because I see the euro weakening against the dollar. I like the dollar versus the majors. I like the emerging markets versus the dollar, and we can talk about EM equities. But I prefer the dollar versus both the euro and sterling in the medium term, as the Fed, in my view, continues to raise it's one more time, whereas the ECB is on the back foot.
Okay, you mentioned then EM equities. Aside from China, what do you like out there?
It's broad. It's Latin America, I think, will continue to do well, partly because of the commodity story, and China. I believe that the tariff discussion is going to be eased from the US as we're heading into the 2020 elections. And as a result of that, or as a consequence of that, I believe that President Trump will focus back towards Europe and specifically Germany. So the tensions that have been maintaining that volatility in market uncertainty related to US-Sino-US relations, I think is going to be shifting away from that towards US-German relations and US-European relations. That's going to be the focus, I think, for the remainder of this year.
Oil's been strong. We're just below that $60 a barrel level when it comes to NYMEX crude. Do you have a trade around the oil space at the moment?
We feel 50 to 60 is the fair value. We were negative all last June when the intervention came through, head into the midterm elections in November, and since then, when the correction took place all the way down to 40, we feel that is unsustainable. 50 to 60 is a fair value because it plays well with the three key players: US, Saudi Arabia, and Russia. So if we see oil move significantly above 60, like 65, then it will be going into a negative territory. But around here, around the 50 to 60 level, we think it's fair value.
Thanos, thank you very much for joining us and helping us get set up for the European trading session today. Thanos Papasavas, ABP Invest. Well, we do just want to get you up to speed before we head off on this developing story that we're tracking for you out of New Zealand. Police say multiple people are dead after shootings at two mosques in the city of Christchurch. They've arrested 4 people, though it's unclear if the gunman is among them. Witnesses say the gunman opened fire during Friday prayers, killing many worshippers. Police put Christchurch under lockdown, though they have lifted the lockdown of some schools. A short time ago, police called across New Zealand to shut their doors during the investigation, they also found vehicles with explosives attached to them. New Zealand's police commissioner says he's unsure if other locations are under threat. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has called this one of New Zealand's darkest days. And we will bring you more updates on this developing story throughout, of course, programming. And that does wrap up this edition of Capital Connection this Friday. I'm Matthew Taylor in Singapore's Squawk Box Europe. Coming up for you right after the break. Stick around.
This law is hurting Huawei's customers in the United States. It's damaging Huawei's reputation, and it's limiting the ability of Huawei to provide its innovative products. What we're hoping to have come out of this lawsuit is to have the particular provisions declared unconstitutional, that Congress hasn't followed the procedures that it's supposed to follow for enacting a constitutional law.
If you look at our debt to GDP ratio for the overall economy, that is, in the 140, 150% debt to GDP, and that includes all kinds of debt. If you look at other large economies around the world, their debt to GDP ratios are much higher, 200%, 300% in some cases. So they are letting up their economy to squeeze our growth, whereas our economy is churning out 7.5% growth without much leverage.
Get CNBC Pro for in-depth access to Wall Street, giving you the edge to invest like a pro. Pro's got global daytime coverage with live streaming of CNBC US, Europe, and Asia. Your subscription gives you access to the experts who do it best with exclusive interviews. Get insights and analysis from the pros, plus make market data analyzed to help you uncover new investment opportunities. Invest like a pro. Go to cnbc.com/getpro for your 30-day free trial.
Investors, when they come to CNBC, want to know not just what just happened, but what it means. My role is really to illuminate market trends.
The story for the year has been, if there's one jolt to one part of the market, it gets buffered by something else.
The market is a mechanism for processing all the world's information all the time, constantly. It's really about what it means for what's happening in the world. CNBC is our window on the markets, and markets are a window on the economy.
This laptop, cell phone, tablet, and headphones together cost more than $3,500. That's about the same as 2.5 months' rent for the average American.
Let's face it, Apple products have never been cheap, and the cost of some of its products has increased dramatically over time. Worldwide shipments of the iPhone increased year on year until it reached its peak of 231 million in 2015.
So what makes these products so pricey? Well, some say it boils down to no other reason than the fact that Apple convince us to pay the hefty price.
There's even an official term for the phenomenon. It's called the Apple tax, which describes customers are willing to pay for an Apple product over a competitor product with similar features, and often it's attributed to the so-called cool factor associated with Apple. It's those premium prices that helped catapult Apple into becoming one of the world's most valuable companies.
A very warm welcome, everybody. This is Squawk Box. Here are your headlines.
UK lawmakers vote to seek a delayed departure from the EU for at least 3 months, paving the way for Prime Minister Theresa May to make a third attempt to get her Brexit deal through.
Chinese stocks rise as Premier Li Keqiang pledges strong support and outlines plans to boost the country's slowing economy in the final days of the annual National People's Congress.
Elsewhere, the US Securities and Exchange Commission sues Volkswagen over its diesel emissions scandal, alleging the automaker carried out a, quote, massive fraud on US investors.
New Zealand police confirmed there are multiple fatalities following shootings at 2 mosques in Christchurch, while 4 people have been arrested as the city remains in lockdown.
Upon a time when UBS traded in the early days of Sergio Motti to the rest of the markets, 16 times forward, I remember, keep coming as well. Let me just tell you that UBS now is looking at its 2018 results and the balance sheet as of the 31st December. And this differs from those presented in the unaudited fourth quarter report published on the 22nd of January as a result of adjusting events after the reporting period. Cut a long story short, and Jeff has been drawing my attention to the story that broke in late February, amongst others, about UBS appealing its fine for 4.5 billion euros from a French tax fraud case as well. Now, as a result of this discrepancy, earnings per share is going to be decreased by 0.1 to dollars per share, so it's 10 cents per share. Report the charges. Okay, there's a good legalistic argument there. We've increased the provision for this matter to a total of 450 million euros. So that will have a dampening effect, I suggest, on UBS shares this morning. Jeff, you've got a bit of comment on this one.
Yeah, I just want to, I mean, obviously, this is still with the courts. The UBS initially rejected an offer of over $1 billion, I think, to settle this. So the French authorities turned around and said, okay, fine, we'll just ratchet it up. And I've seen estimates of anywhere between 5 billion to 3.7 billion euros. Well, if you think about the net profit for this bank in 2018 was 4.3 billion euros, potentially. If the French go for the upper end of this, that could wipe out the whole of the profit for 2018.
But there's always a negotiation.
Of course, there's always a negotiation, but clearly UBS here doesn't feel that that's going to happen because of the amount that they're provisioning at this point. And that looks like a provisioning to the lower side.
I will just put it in the warning as well, Karen, I'm sure you're going to come in on this one. As given the market developments since last October, starting point from the year is different than we'd planned, making this year's journey towards our target steeper. Is that a warning, UBS? I know you're watching. Are you warning on this year's numbers? Yes. Anyway, Karen.
That does sound like a different tone, doesn't it, that it's issuing to investors. I'm just going to come in on the penalties, back to the amount that you were saying, because if they recall, there were trials in the United States or a similar case in the United States and also in Germany. If you look at those cases, the US case was 780 million. That was the settlement, but was, of course, a number of years ago, back in 2009. And when it comes to the German case, that was, again, much lower, 300 million euros. And that was settled in 2014. So the numbers that we're talking about in the French case, far greater than the US and German case.
One day, banks will not have to look at litigation for past demeanours and can get on with the day-to-day business without having to worry what their traders and corporate bankers have done that actually hasn't worked with the regulators, i.e. has been illegal. Right, let us move on. Not saying about UBS, by the way. I'm talking about the industry as a whole. I want to look at the US markets very quickly. It will be registered as a down day for the S&P and an up day for the Dow Jones Industrial Average. But as you know me by now, I call this flat as well. And I think it's eminently sensible to wait and see on these markets as well, given the fact that we don't know what on earth's going on about Mar-a-Lago. We're all looking forward to a trip down there in March, but it's not going to happen. It doesn't look now. Could be April. I say trip down there, metaphorically. I wouldn't actually be going. But Mr. Xi was potentially be going. Apparently his plane been put back on the hangar on that one as well. We don't know what's going on with Brexit at the moment, although I think, and I'll tell you, I think Mrs. May had a good day yesterday, regardless of the shambolic scenes going on all week in Westminster as well. And of course, there are other stories that are up in the air, such as Boeing on a corporate front as well, which has been why actually week today, and I'll tell you the week today very briefly, the Dow has been a drag compared with the S&P. Dow's still done a meritable 1% higher, but the S&P is up 2.4%, and the Nasdaq has done 3% to the upside this week. Asian markets are more interesting, and I'll tell you why in a second. Hang Seng up 0.7%, ASX 200 down, well, flat again, 0.07 of 1%. Right, this is why they're interesting. Look at the Chinese markets. We have got decent gains. Actually, they were bigger gains. There was a one handle on these, 1 point something higher earlier on. So we've abated a little bit on these gains, but we'll get to Eunice just after our first break as well. Delegates at the MPC, the National People's Congress, have voted overwhelmingly in favour of a new foreign investment law. So hopefully smoothing the way to those trade talks we talked about as well. So just want to register that in your mind as well. Bullishness on Asian markets, but not quite as much as it was. Literally only 1 hour ago. Let's have a look at the to Jeffrey now.
No, all right, we'll do those in. You know what? Let's keep them waiting. The suspense.
Yeah, but we're on podcast now. We can't keep them waiting on podcast.
No, but you know the podcast only runs for about 30 minutes, so we'll get them in some point this half hour to make sure we've covered them off.
It's of you stuff. People expect certain things at certain times.
Well, we're just going to mix it up, make it exciting for Friday the 15th. Woo. Let's talk about Brexit.
Everything's exciting compared to I spent 3.5 days with Willem down on Abingdon Green getting wet to the gills.
So
He's still down there.
You'll be better friends than you were before.
Is
by
that
this
possible?
point. Is that possible? The UK Parliament has overwhelmingly voted to ask the EU for an extension to Article 50. Prime Minister Theresa May is now expected to bring her Brexit deal back to Parliament for a third time next week. Willem is in Westminster. Sylvia is in Brussels. Willem, let's start with you. Just on this, what comes next then? We know that there is now this timeline of next Tuesday for a third vote on her current package. But what happens in the intervening period?
Well, essentially, the clue was in the details of the motion that passed last night. Theresa May essentially offering MPs two options to do with voting once again for her deal or not, and what that would mean for her trip to Brussels. But in terms of the timeline, we should hear from the Prime Minister again in the next couple of days, most likely on Monday, outlining quite what her next moves are. We could then see that third meaningful vote on Tuesday. And it's worth noting what MPs did vote against last night, because it was a free vote on that main government motion for an extension. And you saw cabinet ministers, including the Brexit secretary, actually voting against the government, a sign once again of how things are breaking down in terms of the discipline here in Westminster. But before that main vote, MPs did vote against some other important things. They voted against a second referendum. That's not binding, admittedly. They voted against taking control of the party, I might add. And they also voted against holding a series of votes that could essentially flesh out where there might be a majority in the Commons for a future approach to Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn, as leader of the opposition, he saw once again there was some blood in the water, and he criticised the Prime Minister's approach. Even though MPs had voted against taking control, he once again insisted he'd like to see more consensus in the House of Commons.
After the last few days of government chaos and some defeats, all of us now have the opportunity and the responsibility to work together to find a solution to the crisis facing this country, where the government has so dramatically failed to do so. We've begun to hold meetings with members across the House to find a consensus and a compromise that meets the needs of this country. But the last few days have also put a responsibility on the Prime Minister. First, to publicly accept that both her deal and no deal are simply no longer viable options. And secondly, to bring forward the necessary legislation to amend the exit date of the 29th of March.
But of course, Theresa May doesn't seem to accept that her deal is now dead in the water. She's essentially going to be racing along with some of her allies to try and persuade some of these rebellious Conservative MPs, alongside members of the DUP, the small Northern Irish party that props up her government, to come behind her deal in the next few days in order to try and get it passed before she travels to Brussels.
No, Willem, look, the rebellious Remainer cabinet ministers, let alone her MPs, were given a dressing down. Then, literally, in a very short period, Mr. Barclay, actually her Brexit minister, or Secretary of State, then obviously rebelled against her. But what I think is more interesting is that I didn't read much about actually she had a very good day, and I think she did have a good day. I'm interested in what you think. I know we can debate this, but the referendum vote without motions went her way. She got her date that she wanted on the extension. And also she didn't get Parliament taking control on the indicative vote. So for once, I think Mrs. May had, I say very good. She had an acceptable day. Is that fair?
I think, based on the fact that she didn't lose control of the process to Parliament, you could say that she is still in the game, essentially. But it was very interesting to see the wording of the motion that the government put forward that did eventually pass, because essentially it forced MPs to vote for an extension while also forcing them to allow for the fact there might be this third meaningful vote next week. So that was some quite clever wording that keeps her deal alive, in theory, ahead of next week. And now we're going to see this kind of carrot and stick approach from the government over the next few days, where they'll be using the potential incentive that there might be changes to the Attorney General's legal advice to try and bring some of these rebellious MPs back on board her deal, though there's no guarantee that the legal interpretation will allow. And then, of course, the stick approach is saying, look, if you don't vote for my deal, which would allow for a 3-month technical extension, I can't tell you what the people in Brussels will say to me next week. They may want a year, 2 years, and that is something that a lot of those in favour of quick Brexit.
Very much been. I tweeted MV4. She could get it over the line because she lost MV1 on January the 15th.
Yes, this is a meaningful vote.
Oh,
so we're now breaking it down to MV.
We're all there now. We're all there.
MV.
It's like you with CR7, you and your mate Cristiano Ronaldo. We
Yes.
can all go MV.
Okay.
So MV1, powerful vote. She lost by 230 votes, worst ever. MV2, she lost by 149 votes, meaningful vote too, which is the fourth worst from a modern government. MV3, on that basis, she loses by what, 70 votes, or given that extrapolation. MV4 gets over the line. Victory by 1,000 losses for Mrs May.
So we just keep going. We just keep pushing to eventually
That
through.
seems to be her strategy. Nothing else I can see.
But is the irony lost on anybody that we cannot have a second referendum because it would be undemocratic, but we can have 4 votes?
Well, there is
to try and
parliamentary
get that
convention.
package over the line.
So, as you know, when I throw myself into Abingdon, I learn a little bit more about some of the more esoteric rules. And there is parliamentary convention that you cannot ad infinitum keep going back with the same point to Parliament. This is something that actually she could be challenged on. So unless there is a tweaking of the language or a differentiation in the circumstances surrounding this, you can't keep going back to Parliament, if challenged, with the same wording for the same bill. Obviously, because otherwise it would just log up the whole filibuster,
So
the whole of
something
Parliament.
legally binding would do the trick, is what you're saying.
Let's go back to
Maybe,
this. and
yes,
just-
maybe.
Let's Sylvia, I know, is standing in the cold in Brussels.
Yes.
Let's get out to Sylvia
Yes.
and let's just get the Brussels angle on this, because it's all well and good for the UK parliamentarians to say we may want an extension here. But how is Brussels going to deal with that, given that I suspect not all of the member states, Sylvia, actually want to give the UK politicians more breathing space?
Exactly, Jeff. There are 2 big questions at this stage. Will the EU say yes to a request for an extension? And if it does, under which circumstances will that happen? Now, we heard yesterday from the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, suggesting that the 27 European leaders should discuss a long extension. I asked a European official here yesterday, what does it mean, a long extension? And he said that there's no definition, but it could be of about 1 year. So those discussions about an extension will happen here next week at a summit. And of course, we cannot forget that we need the consensus from the 27 European countries. If one member state is not happy with the request for an extension, then that country can effectively block that process. And so in this context, Michel Barnier said last night that if indeed the UK still wants to leave the EU in an orderly fashion, it has to be with the current withdrawal agreement. Let's listen in.
If the UK still wants to leave the EU, and if it wants to leave in an orderly manner, which is what the Prime Minister tells us, then this treaty, such as it is, which organises the orderly separation, is the only one possible and available. And in order to go further, we do not need a negative vote against the treaty. We need a positive and constructive vote. This treaty is not the end of the story. It organises the orderly separation, which is preferable to a no deal, a hard Brexit, or a disorderly separation.
So effectively, all scenarios are still on the table. And when it comes to an extension, we cannot forget as well that it's going to be very important for the UK to have a very credible justification. That was very clear. For instance, the Prime Minister of Luxembourg said that last night. He told the UK that this is not the time to keep calm and drink tea.
This is not the time to keep calm and drink tea. Very funny. Sylvia, thank you very much indeed for that. We'll come back
You know
to
they're
a little bit
terrified
later.
as well. For all of their blast stuff, this is the problem with the British negotiation. They are terrified of having, this is the point I think I made to you guys, or to you yesterday, because you were on a later shift. I made to you about the MEPs, British MEPs. The last thing they want is a resurgent Farage with a Brexit party having seats beyond the parliamentary elections in May. Because you have an emboldened La Lega, you're going to have emboldened PEN, you're going to have an emboldened AFD, plus a whole host of other populists, including Wilders' bunch as well. The last thing they want is a man who hates the organisation taking their payroll to be there as well. They do not want British MEPs.
So they could end up with a parliament as dysfunctional as the one we've got.
Yeah.
I like it.
But we go through the motions then with an extension. We have to go through the
Do you know
motions
Jeff
of the parliamentary
asks
vote.
for stuff, and Jeff gets, by the way.
Right.
Jeff said, where are my opening calls?
Well, for those of our audience who are going to listen to this on the podcast as well, because we do have a podcast now at all good podcast platforms, here are your opening calls. The FTSE 100 called up 9 points, the Xetra DAX called up 7, the CAC down 1, and FTSE MIB called up 30. I would call that a fairly flat start to the trading session. We'll take the break. We'll be right back, everybody. Stay with us.
CNBC's Global CFO Council.
It seems to me that the business community globally is refocusing on the opportunity in Asia and emerging.
We get 19, 20% in Latin America. We're seeing similar numbers in Asia Pacific. Even in some of the more mature economies, we're still seeing significant growth. In Europe and the US, you have to get used to 3s currently.
CNBC's Global
Path to accelerate growth.
EY has taken the time to really understand the challenges that we're facing and our vision for the future. Veridesk is a company that has evolved to offer a full suite of office products to develop fast, flexible workspaces.
Veridesk is building something incredible, and we are extremely proud to be a trusted business advisor.
Delivering Alpha is the #1 investment event for people in the institutional money management business. If you watch Delivering Alpha on television, online, via social media, you are going to come away with actionable ideas that can make you money.
The Swiss lender reported a 4% rise in full-year net profit to 735 million Swiss francs, missing expectations.
It's quite cold here, and the reaction to the earnings this morning has also been quite cold in the marketplace as well.
The markets became more difficult. Client activity was much lower in the second half. So another drop with regard to the return on assets is mainly coming from lower activity levels.
BNP is one of those European banks that continues to be under a great deal of pressure.
If you look at the overall fee evolution, the outlook is a tad more moderate than it was.
Societe Generale has cut its profitability target for the medium term.
We have to adjust our plan for this evolution in the external environment.
The market will be applauding Tidjane Thiam's self-help measures here.
We've had our best fourth quarter since 2013. So that's the magnitude of the change that has taken place. It would be really reassuring.
Get market fixed. Find smart money tips. Catch top CEOs.
What's your response to that?
See the Kramer Remix.
What stocks fit you?
Watch it all online. CNBC's got the clips. Real trades.
The stock was a $50 stock.
Real debate.
We have margin upside.
There's a place to make some money.
Halftime report on CNBC.
The Bank of Japan has maintained its monetary policy but moderated its growth outlook. The Japanese central bank revised down its view on exports and emitting slowing global economic growth. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin has ruled out a trade summit between Presidents Trump and Xi at the end of this month. Speaking after his testimony to the Senate Finance Committee, Mnuchin said U.S. and Chinese negotiators were working as quickly as possible, adding he was pleased with progress, but, quote, there is still a lot of work to do. President Trump echoed that sentiment during a St. Patrick's Day reception at the White House and praised the work of his chief negotiator.
We'll have news on China probably one way or the other. We're going to know over the next 3 to 4 weeks. And if that one gets done, it will be something that people are going to be talking about for a long time. And because we have been really taken advantage of for a long time. And now I think China, frankly, they've been very responsible and very reasonable.
President Trump. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang has also expressed hope for U.S. trade talks. Speaking at his annual National People's Congress Meet the Press event, Li said common interests far outweigh disputes between the two countries as the NPC concluded Beijing's largely ceremonial parliament, also approving a new foreign investment law. Let's get out to Eunice, who obviously has been following this event all the way through. So how has this reshaped our understanding, Eunice, of how they're going to manage the economy station?
Well, I think the main event today was the passage of the new foreign investment law, because it could be a signal that Beijing is willing to make some compromises on a trade deal with Washington. So it was a highly unusual move. We saw quite a few changes in the law, revisions at the last minute that changed the language so that the law directly addresses some of the concerns of international companies here, namely IP theft. So one of the big complaints here among international companies is that when they want to introduce a new product or open up a factory, they have to go through a licensing process with a government-led board. And the suspicion has been that when they give up a lot of this information, that the information is eventually leaked to their Chinese competition. So now with this new law, this law addresses that problem, barring officials from divulging trade secrets and also threatening them with criminal prosecution. So the American business community has been pleased with this development and saying that it is a step in the right direction. Of course, there's still a question about the implementation, but the premier at his press briefing today addressed that as well, saying that China would roll out accompanying rules to make the new foreign investment law operable. This is what he said.
More areas will be opened up for foreign investment. We will also enhance protection of intellectual property. In this respect, we will propose to make revisions to relative laws governing intellectual property protection. We will introduce a mechanism of punitive compensation to ensure that all infringements of intellectual property will be seriously dealt with, and such infringements will have nowhere to hide.
As for the trade dispute with the United States, he said that he hoped that the ongoing negotiations would produce a good result. And he also addressed European concerns that came up during the press event that Europe could be left out or even damaged because of the trade tensions between the EU and China. He said, "We will not exploit any third parties, and that a growing China-EU relationship serves the interests of both China, the EU, as well as the rest of the world." And another a surprising comment came out of the premier today at his press conference when he specifically addressed worries that Beijing could use the technology of Chinese tech firms such as Huawei to spy on other countries. He said, "Let me tell you explicitly that this is not consistent with Chinese law. This is not how China behaves. We did not do that and will not do that in the future." Now, China's premier also, of course, has a portfolio of the economy, and he did acknowledge the downward pressure that the economy here faces. He said that the government, though, would be using a lot of different tools to try to stabilize the growth. The biggest one, though, is the cuts to taxes as well as other fees. In fact, he said that the tax cuts for the value-added tax are going to kick in April, and that social insurance reductions would start in May. Guys?
Eunice, I've got a question. Actually, things get to a certain stage with the negotiators, and then Trump could just walk away like he walked away with Kim Jong-un as well. I'm hearing lots more about that kind of thing, that the Chinese are very wary of walking into a trap in Mar-a-Lago, wherever it may well be, and then being thwarted at the last possible moment, hence creating a PR disaster.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was coming out of Washington. So that Trump administration officials or other sources in D.C. have been alerting the rest of the world that the Chinese have been concerned about this, that they are worried that their nightmare scenario could become reality if they don't make sure that the trade deal is edited line by line. So they have been apparently going through all of the details of this trade deal. What they don't want is to have President Xi Jinping walk over to shake hands in some sort of ceremony with President Trump, and then to have the rug pulled out from him. Because the last thing that the Chinese want is for President Xi, who's really seen as a man who is almost untouchable here, as somebody who could be that harmed in terms of his reputation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Always a pleasure seeing you, Eunice.
North Korea is reportedly considering suspending nuclear talks with the United States unless Washington softens its stance on sanctions. According to the Russian news agency TASS, Pyongyang may also rethink its ban nuclear tests. The report quotes a North Korean diplomat as blaming U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo for the breakdown of last month's summit in Hanoi. The North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, is reportedly going to make an announcement on talks soon. An update on that developing story in New Zealand this hour. The Prime Minister saying this hour, we believe 40 people may have lost their lives now following shootings at 2 mosques in Christchurch. 3 men and 1 woman have been arrested. The city remains in lockdown as police search for further suspects and neutralized a number of vehicles found with explosives in the city. All mosques nationwide have been ordered to shut their doors. Authorities say they cannot assume the attack is contained to Christchurch. The Prime Minister called the events, quote, clearly one of New Zealand's darkest days. We're going to take the break. We'll be back in just a moment. US authorities suing Volkswagen for massive fraud over the German carmaker's diesel emissions scandal. We'll update you on that story when we come back.
In finance, we know the future is impossible to predict. Unless, of course, you create it. We designed our International Financial Center on Al Maria Island by asking global businesses what they want and finding the perfect conditions for their success. Direct access to the world's fastest growing regions. Efficiency, easy business setup, with 100% ownership and 0% corporate taxes. Proximity to some of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds. Security, with robust international regulations. And of course, a life with leisure, art, and culture. Sounds like a lot to ask, doesn't it? Not here, where business gets what it wants. This is the future built at Abu Dhabi Global Market.
From concept,
this gives us the ability to charge 1,000 times faster than what you can do in lithium-ion batteries.
to commercial impact.
The opportunity to actually monetize the relationship with customers is going to be higher than it's ever been.
The Edge brings you the most exciting technology and groundbreaking innovations. From startups,
we expect to really mass deploy them into hundreds of millions of devices.
And the world's biggest businesses. Edge gives you full access.
This algorithm really does version of each company to make your own foundation.
There's going to be a time in our not-so-distant future where everyone's driving electric vehicles.
And we reveal the disruptors of the future.
The biggest game market in the world is mobile phones. It's about, how we manage to immerse players in a story.
You, my friend, have gone from analog to digital.
Now I'm ready for the future.
The Edge, only on CNBC. From niche to mainstream.
Before you can develop a market and move it to a more deeper, more liquid market, you have to define the market infrastructure. You have to do the financial plumbing.
Making sure your money reflects your values.
Asset managers are going to be creating investment vehicles. Asset owners need to know what they're investing in before we impact wash.
The outlook for impact investing only on the next Davos debate.
It's 11 a.m. on Wall Street, and Squawk Alley is live.
Paul Kintineer, Morgan Brennan, John Fort, Squawk Alley on CNBC.
Welcome to the programme. In the headlines this hour, UK lawmakers vote to seek a delayed departure from the EU for at least 3 months, paving the way for Prime Minister Theresa May to make a third attempt to get her Brexit deal through Parliament. Chinese stocks rise as Premier Li Keqiang pledges strong support and outlines plans to boost the country's slowing economy on the final day of the annual National People's Congress. UBS says the year has started differently than planned, warning of a, quote, steeper journey towards its targets, as the Swiss bank also boosts its litigation provisions. New Zealand's Prime Minister says 40 people have been killed after shootings at 2 mosques in Christchurch, while 4 people have been arrested as the city remains in lockdown.
It was a mixed day on Wall Street with fortunes impacted by concerns around trade as investors picking up on the narrative that we're unlikely to have the summit Mar-a-Lago later this month, that the investors were looking for the handshake moment that would seal a resolution in trade spat between the US and the two presidents, President Xi and Trump, unlikely to meet at this stage with further talks continuing. So that negative on trade did impact some of the confidence levels. So we saw pullback on the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ. In terms of one area of the market that sagged, that was materials leading a decline. But you also saw an impact on some of the communication stocks, and that including stocks like Facebook these days. And it was a challenging day for Facebook, big cap stock. We saw the outage problem that impacted the fortunes of the company. Also, investigators are looking into the company, in particular around some of those privacy issues that it has had. So that was a big negative for the stock, down 1.8%, impacting both the S&P and NASDAQ. But after hours, we've seen further news flow too, that two more executives have departed the business, and they relate to the WhatsApp part of the company, but also around the product, the chief product officer deciding to depart. So we'll look for some more activity in Facebook stock today. Meantime, General Electric having a positive day as the CEO was describing 2019 as a reset moment for investors, and also imploring them to stay on the journey after updating assumptions. The narrative was a little bit challenging for investors, but I think the olive branch, the appeal from the chairman and CEO, Larry Culp, was positive, and that saw the stock bounce 2.8%. Let me take you to the Asian markets, and we can pick up on some of those trade issues, and you can see what's happening as the Australian market closes out the week on negative footing. And we've got the other markets, though, still chasing the green. We've had some updates about the amount of stimulus we can expect from China. They're coming through from a press conference at the end of the NPC, and the Shanghai Composite trading up by 0.6%. Firmer trade for the Hong Kong market, also seeing about 0.8% on Tokyo stocks. So let me just take you quickly to the opening calls, as we see a lot of reactions still to the Brexit developments, as UK lawmakers have voted in favour of delaying departure from the EU for at least 3 months. We have the FTSE so far called to open up about 9 points. We have travelled a fair way on the pound this week, higher, lower, then back up again. And you can see where the FTSE is now looking to start out the day. That versus fairly mixed signals elsewhere on the continent. Slight upward push for the DAX, flat for the French market, and higher for Italian stocks at this stage. Jeff.
Karen, we're just going to take you to Wellington in New Zealand. Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, is speaking. Let's just listen in.
I imagine that these would have represented particular brothers, fathers, sons. I haven't had a breakdown at this stage. Sorry, it's not information I can share.
What is your advice at the moment about the Australian man? Has a very we now know he has a very equivalent online presence, and it seems like it's been back for a couple of weeks. How is it not that
These are obviously questions that at this point I'm unable to give additional details on. Obviously, though, that offender is in custody now, so I can give that assurance he has been apprehended. He is also accompanied by 2 other associates. He is being actively questioned, obviously.
So we're in the middle of a press conference with the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. Just to update you on some of the things that she'd already mentioned in that press conference. They now believe 40 people have lost their lives in this attack. The Prime Minister also saying more than 20 people seriously injured, and she has described the Christchurch shootings as a terrorist act. Those in custody have extremist views and have no place in New Zealand, she says. She also goes on to say there is no reason to believe at this stage that there are any other suspects, but they are not making assumptions. And as you've heard previously in the programme, Christchurch remains locked down at this hour. If there is more from that press conference that we think you need to hear, we'll bring that to you straight away.
Okay, let's move on. US authorities are suing Volkswagen and former CEO Martin Winterkorn over the German carmaker's diesel emissions scandal. An SEC filing says VW executives knew that more than 500,000 diesel vehicles in the US exceeded legal emissions when the company issued more than $13 billion in bonds and other securities between April 2014 and May 2015. The lawsuit accuses the car maker of committing, quote, massive fraud against American investors. In a statement, Volkswagen called the SEC's claim, quote, legally and factually flawed. It also said the SEC repeats unproven claims against Winterkorn. Annetta joins now on the phone with more. Annetta, what do you think of this?
I think it's a very tricky territory Volkswagen actually venturing here, because it's to having lied to authorities and to have broken U.S.-American law when they settled with other U.S. institutions like the DOJ. They have paid more than $1 billion to various authorities. So I guess the SEC might have a case here. Looking at the balance sheet of Volkswagen, they have roughly 10 billion euros of legal liabilities. So they have they have something on their books already in order to potentially settle those claims from investors. There's a suit going on in Germany, but this is concerning equity-related issues. So what the SEC is saying that investors were misguided over the price of those bonds. 13 billion of US dollars in asset-backed securities were sold in that time frame. And apparently the price was quite high at that time, given the problems Volkswagen had surrounding Dieselgate. That's the issue here. How it plays out and when we get more, we don't know, but clearly it's a concern to investors. I've looked at the early pre-market indication. It seems that the shares are down at least a little bit in very early pre-market trading. With that, back to you.
Annette, I've got a completely different question, which has been all over the German press and international press as well. It's about Herbert Diess and something the CEO of Volkswagen thought it was okay to say at a Volkswagen management event on Tuesday. He said, used the expression EBIT, as in earnings before interest and tax, macht frei. Does anybody in Germany actually think that's acceptable in this day and age, given the fact we've just talked about a hate crime in New Zealand as well? EBIT macht frei, which of course no one will miss the coincidence that it sounds very much like Arbeit macht frei, which was inscribed over the entrance to Auschwitz and other German Nazi concentration camps. How on earth can Mr. Diess think this is just something that was erroneous? He said it was at no time my intention for this statement to be placed in a false context. Just what kind of context did Mr. Diess want this phrase put, Annetta?
We actually was talking about his profit target, but I completely agree with you that this is just not really appropriate, and everybody who's German or speaks the German language would have the same associations as you, like you had. So I guess it was just very unfortunate. He was repeatedly saying that he didn't have anything like that in mind, that he was just talking about more ambitious profit target. Well, he's an Austrian, so that makes it even worse, because we all know that Hitler also was an Austrian, but, well, apparently he didn't think about that association.
I appreciate that, and I don't mean to put you on the spot on that, but I just cannot. I know he's apologised and said, "Oh, it was placed in a false context." I would love one day for someone to ask Mr. Diess just what context he thought was acceptable to use the phrase when it had connotations which were so disturbing. Many thanks for taking on both stories this morning, Annetta. Good to hear from you.
This year's European parliamentary elections are expected to feature a number of populist parties from across the bloc. President Trump's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, has sought to support populist candidates through an organisation known as The Movement. Bannon set it up with Belgian lawyer Michael Modrickman in 2016. CNBC's Sylvia Amaro sat down with Modrickman and asked him about the movement's strategy for the upcoming elections.
The battle is at the national level. I mean, against for Orban, it's for Salvini, it's for Le Pen, it's for wherever they are. I mean, the national leaders and parties to fight their own election. I'm fighting my own election here in Wallonia and Brussels in Belgium. What we hope by bringing people ease or to favor tomorrow a single Eurosceptic group. Today, there are basically three groups. influence today at the EU Parliament, it will be a success. But the influence is not only at the Parliament's level, it's also the Council of Ministers level. If you are a member of the movement that are tomorrow head of state or prime minister, there you have also a very important position and veto power on some issues.
Let us move on. The governor of Lombardy, which is Italy's richest region, see that giving greater powers to local governments would solve many problems. Speaking in an exclusive interview, he explained what set Lombardy apart from other parts of the country.
Lombardy is going through a very positive phase, even if Italy and Europe are in crisis. Our data are the best of our country. In 2017, our GDP has grown by 1.8%, while the rest of the country has grown by 1%. The GDP per person is comparable to the big European nations. 36,600 euros per person in Lombardy, 36,500 euros in the UK, and 35,000 euros in France. This demonstrates our efficiency, and it explains why so many companies want to invest in Lombardy.
The Lombardy region has been seeking more autonomy within Italy. Do you think this drive for more autonomy could be at the detriment of the less wealthy regions in the southern part of Italy?
Credo che sia la riforma di tutte le riforme in questo paese.
I think that this is the most important reform for our country. I think it's important to highlight how giving more autonomy to regions is beneficial for the whole country. Italy can become more modern and efficient, and we would be able to distinguish those who can do their job, those who can't. Having said that, autonomy would give Lombardy the possibility of thriving even more and to take better decisions. I always say, as an example, we have the best healthcare system in Italy and one of the best in Europe. Despite that, we need to comply with several national laws that don't allow us to provide the even better answers to our citizens. For instance, we are forced by a national law to cut the number of employees in the healthcare sector, even if we have the possibility of hiring more doctors and nurses. This is absurd. We force an excellent institution to not progress as fast as it could. Respecting budget, respecting the national interest and the national unity, we will be able to grow our GDP even more.
And Giuliano also asked him whether he's worried by the budget dispute between the European Commission and the Italian government.
Sono più che altro preoccupato sul...
I'm not worried because all those problems can be solved. I am worried by the way Europe is solving issues. Europe has a big value and it can become a big resource, and it is fundamental for our region. But it needs to pay more attention to the needs of the regions. It needs to look more carefully at the changes in the world, and it needs to be less bureaucratic and less orientated to the needs of a single part. Europe needs to look with greater interest at the interests of single regions. For instance, during this month, Lombardy has become the president of EU SALP, a group of regions around the Alps who are facing the same geographical issues. I think Europe should in future focus more on regions than on member states. Europe should give more powers to local authorities.
Well, let's take a break. We'll be back in just a moment and we'll take you live to Cheltenham ahead of this afternoon's Gold Cup race, where Adam has somehow managed to get his hands on one of the most prized possessions in horse racing. We'll be back with Adam in just a minute. Stay with us.
Qingdao is breaking new ground as China's only comprehensive reform pilot zone focused on wealth management.
We have seen now recently a very focus from the central authorities to build up the wealth.
With China's third largest GDP, economic ties with cities as diverse as New York and London. So come and jump into a world of opportunity.
The CNBC Disruptor 50 is a list of the private companies that are disrupting existing industries or creating entirely new ones.
We can't go public until we're flying regularly to Mars.
This list celebrates entrepreneurs to keep our viewers ahead of the game.
I think I'm the most brave under pressure.
I tend to try not to do the things that people have done before.
If the writing's on the wall, the sooner you do it, the better.
I am very competitive. I always want to win.
There's nowhere in this position. You have to get used to it.
My passion for sort of the human conversation always leads me in the end to the next big story.
Entrepreneurs are in some ways immune to the notion of risk.
I didn't want to be on the sidelines. I wanted to be in the trenches.
Rise and grind. This is how you do it.
If you could predict what's going to happen, then don't do it.
The true measure of a person is not what they take from this world, but it's what they give this world.
A woman demanding we all do better.
People continue getting smarter and being better people, and hopefully care about each other more and call out abuse of power.
A whistleblower that shook Hollywood to its core.
I think Hollywood is a very fear-based place. I mean, my book really compares the cult I grew up in to the cult of Hollywood.
Rose McGowan, a year on from her best-selling book Brave, on her life, her career, and her call for change, only on the next CNBC Conversation.
How'd the markets do? You heard they did fine.
We're only 12 or 13 points from another.
What is the point? What's your bottom line?
The volatility index, the VIX, spiked from about 10.
Want to follow something more? Now your watch list's keeping score.
In the age of digital disruption, get fresh business perspectives on the fast-changing world of tech, innovation, and startups from one place. CNBC.com/technology.
There will be a prize of $465,000 on offer for the winning horse in today's Cheltenham Gold Cup as the four-day festival reaches its climax. Adam joins us now with more. Adam, you're holding the Gold Cup, I believe, and I wonder whether that will be presented to the winning connections, possibly, of presenting Percy, who is meant to be one of the favourites today.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Presenting Percy is one of the big favourites for today's race. 70,000 fans will be packed into Cheltenham today for the climax of this festival. All quiet at the moment, but I'm pleased to say I've been joined by Ian Renton, the Jockey Club's Southwest Regional Director for the Cheltenham Festival. Ian, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
This is what it's all about. Why is this day so special to you and for the many thousands of people coming to see it?
The festival is just a fantastic occasion, and the Magnus Gold Cup is the absolute pinnacle of the day. I mean, we've seen some fantastic stories over the first 3 days, and everyone is aiming for this day and to the Magnus Gold Cup itself.
This is a huge event, seen the world over. How do you ensure that punters are getting a value for money? Because bearing in mind, there's such hospitality, such effort goes into making this such an event that is a big deal to people. And we're stood here in the parade ring, and scenes here were so special yesterday, for example.
They were very special, and I think that's what people love. It is the atmosphere. It is unbelievably romantic winds like we saw yesterday. That attracts, we'll have 265,000 people here over the 4 days. And you mentioned the hospitality. I mean, we try and put some innovative, really interesting hospitality packages together to attract those that want something a bit more special. But it's also, we're here for the everyday punter who can come and pay anything between £40 up to £100, depending where they want to be, and just have a great day out and experience what we saw yesterday.
You mentioned the everyday punter. You see people from all walks of life coming to Cheltenham. You see incredible outfits, incredible people. That adds to the whole of it all. And then when you get a day like today, when the Gold Cup comes around, what are your feelings coming today? This must be like Christmas and birthday wrapped into one.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it is fantastic to see the massive range of people. I mean, you'll see we'll have royalty here over the occasion, and we'll have lots of people who just want for society. But here at Cheltenham, they all come together. They act as one just for the enjoyment of the racing. And yeah, when we build up to the Gold Cup itself, it is just it's a frenzy of emotion. I think we all feel. I mean, we've been through it yesterday. I can't recall a day like we had yesterday with Bryony Frost and Andrew Gemmell, both of the winners. It was just unbelievable, and we look for something similar today.
And I've mentioned already that Presenting Percy is looking like maybe going off as favourite for the Gold Cup. What do you like to see? Do you like to see a big favourite coming home and the bookies taking a bit of a beating, or do you like to see a big outsider coming in and other Cheltenham stories you mentioned?
Well, it was just, we thought we could written the script ourselves yesterday and are thinking, right, who would be the best story today? And one, I mean, presenting person would be fantastic. You know, a small trainer in Ireland, the owner, would absolutely love to win the Gold Cup. But, one of the biggest trainers of all, Willie Mullins, has never won the Gold Cup. From opposite ends of that, and there's so many stories. I can guarantee whoever wins, there'll be a great story behind it.
Very shortly, crowds will start pouring in anytime in the next couple of hours, but imagine it to get a lot louder by the time the Gold Cup race goes off a little later on this afternoon.
Fabulous coverage. Thank you very much indeed for that, Adam. Boeing has halted all deliveries of its 737 MAX jetliner. The move comes after aviation authorities around the world ordered the grounding of the aircraft following 2 crashes in the past 5 months. Boeing also suffered a further setback after the Pentagon indicated that it had lost confidence in the aircraft manufacturer's ability to deliver a new aerial refueling tanker currently in production. Boeing's share price has dropped almost 12% since last week's fatal Ethiopian airline crash. Tesla has unveiled its new Model Y electric SUV. The new car is set to launch in autumn 2020 at a starting price of $47,000, whilst a standard model price at $39,000 is due to roll out the following year. It marks Tesla's fastest growing vehicle segment.
Facebook's chief product officer, Chris Cox, is leaving the tech giant. No explicit reason was provided for his departure, which comes amid proposals by CEO Mark Zuckerberg, who joined Facebook in 2005, said in a post that the company needs, quote, leaders who are excited to see the new direction through. Of course, he would have been overseeing this move to consolidate the platforms and using encryption, so perhaps he was just not excited about the move. But Facebook's push into encryption-based messaging comes as tech firm consumer worries over data privacy. Concerns have also been raised around cloud security in recent years. However, in an exclusive interview with CNBC, Therese Tucker, CEO at the NASDAQ-listed software accounting firm Blackline, says global attitudes regarding data security are shifting.
You have to have an incredible focus on security. You have to have layer upon layer upon layer, because this is companies' very private, very, very sensitive financial data. So you do have to invest heavily in security. That being said, over the last couple of years, we're really starting to see a dramatic shift globally around attitudes. And I'll just give you a quick example. We currently operate a colo, a private data center, private cloud, okay? Really, just recently, we've started to see a big adoption of some of the public clouds that are out there, like Amazon, like Google, right? People are like, yeah, no, it's okay. They're secure. So there is a greater comfort happening. And we'll see over time if we could actually start to utilize public clouds as opposed to private data centers.
There is an expression in this country that it is enough to drive you to drink. You probably heard that expression. And some may argue, and given that you've been down on Abingdon Green all week, that Brexit itself is part of that process. And in connection with that, I just want to point out that we will be talking to the boss of JD Wetherspoon in just a moment, Tim Martin, who is a notable Brexiteer from the corporate community, one of the few that's been very public and very loud about the need for the UK to exit the EU.
You've got to give Tim credit. Althis, they've taken out foreign alcohol, a lot of foreign alcohol, and like, for instance, brandy and cognac, which I think is just traditionally French, if I'm correct.
Champagne.
English sparkling wines instead. Australian brandy. I didn't even know you Australians made brandy. Is it any good?
Of course. Very good.
Yeah,
Anything with alcohol in it that has an Australian label is very good.
Gin sales have been very good. But I mean, it's very interesting. And Tim and I took each other to task a little bit last time we spoke. And I'll quote Tim, he said, I won't be lectured by a journalist about how to run my business. And I was saying to him, I thought you'd got distracted by Brexit, Tim. But he put me in my place.
I think it's, you've been down a week.
Rather than the pub.
Yeah. Well, I was just responding to Robin Bew here from the Economist group, but basically saying it would reflect very badly on MPs if they vote through the third representing of her deal next Tuesday.
I couldn't disagree more.
Would it be any worse than the chaos that we've already had
Why does it reflect very badly? As circumstances change, as alternatives diminish as well, the fact that parliamentarians, if they get to a cohesive position where there's a majority for something, why would that reflect badly that actually they've avoided chaos and actually come round a single idea? I would dispute that very heartily with Robin, actually, and I welcome the opportunity.
We're going to take the break. We'll be back in just a moment. We're looking forward to catching up then with Tim Martin from JD Wetherspoon in just a few moments. Some of the world's biggest international banks are feeling the impact of the broad economic slowdown.
My view is that is absolutely a temporary slowdown.
Even though the economists say global growth will be okay next year, the stock markets are telling us something completely different.
It's going to be very bumpy because the course of travel isn't so clear.
A good scenario with a significant uncertainty ahead.
This year we will see a return to more normal levels of volatility.
If you're a strong company, you'll be able to get out even in a more volatile environment.
Is that money moving because people are worried that they're going to be exposed to a recession?
Doesn't mean that a recovery has to end just because it's gone through a certain amount of time.
The month of December was really kind of strange.
I don't see, any recession.
CEOs aren't very good at kind of looking 18 months.
The possibilities is broader, and the range of bad outcomes is increasing.
Europe's automakers have come under pressure amid the threat of US tariffs.
The looming trade war is actually weighing their business outlook. Everybody's a bit cautious.
Issue for us because mostly our premium brands here in Germany are depending on the import market of the United States.
There are a lot of big macroeconomic clouds on the horizons that we might have to deal with.
We are for free world trade, but at the end it depends on the politics.
Will the mass market really work for electric cars? That's a big question here.
The scale at which the market is gaining its power in terms of EV and 100% EV. So this is excellent for us.
First of all, BMW has always believed in electrification. We started our journey in 2013 already with the i3, and that's why we are market leader in Europe.
You take 2025 or perhaps a little bit early, because I'm one of the guys that thinks electrification comes a little bit earlier than 25.
In 2018, Brooks Koepka capped off his best season to date on the PGA Tour. Oh, wow. Taking home 2 major trophies, Koepka finished a career-best 9th in the final FedEx Cup standings and earned 2018's Player of the Year honors.
It's truly an honor.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Squawk Box, and these are your headlines.
UK lawmakers vote to seek a delayed departure from
Outlines plans to boost the country's slowing economy on the final day of the annual National People's Congress.
UBS says the year has started differently than planned, a warning of a, quote, steeper journey towards its target, as the Swiss bank also boosts its litigation provisions.
New Zealand's Prime Minister says 40 people have been killed after shootings at 2 mosques in Christchurch, while 4 people have been arrested as the city remains in lockdown. Disappointing trade news for investors to navigate stateside yesterday, with a likely delay to any summit that was as expected to be staged at Mar-a-Lago later this month. Investors were hoping for a big handshake resolution between Xi and Trump, but that seemed being kicked out into the long grass as investors wait for further negotiations and a breakthrough between the two countries. So a negative tone that was set on Wall Street, both pulling into the red, the Dow managing to still hold on to just a little bit of green. Financials leading some of the gains that we saw stateside yesterday. But when it comes to individual parts of the market, we did see some pressure coming through from Facebook, which had some power out or some outages on the network, and also some concerns again around investigators looking into privacy fears. Now, when it comes to the Asian markets, trying to shrug off some of that red ink, and you can see Australia not doing the trick, but we have seen some gains for the Chinese market. You heard in the headlines, again, supportive comments from authorities about the Chinese economy, about the amount of stimulus coming through from the fiscal and monetary side, enough to prop up the Chinese stock market and divert attention away from some of these trade fears. 3023, 1.1% higher on the market, firmer for Hong Kong. And you can see Japan also out in front, 163 points, or close to 0.8%. Now, the opening calls, there's been a lot of twists and turns in the Brexit story this week. And as we look to close out the week so far, UK lawmakers have voted in favour of seeking a delayed departure from the EU. The FTSE's chasing 9 points before the start. Not a huge amount of appetite, but to the upside. And don't forget, pound has been on a bit of a journey this week from the high levels, 132.33 almost, down below 130 and right back up to this 132 level. So the FTSE has had to try and track that journey as well. The DAX and CAC futures, a little bit soft, you've got to say. And if you look at the Italian market, that's where you are seeing a little bit of green coming into the mix. So it looks like it might be just a little bit of a tilt into the green, but not much appetite for stocks, Steve.
I'm just looking at the numbers from JD Weatherspoon, and there's all kinds of very interesting things here with Tim Martin's group. As ever, extraordinarily good like-for-likes. Now, partly of that is, as Tim's pointed out in his commentary, is a little bit about the weather, because you remember this year, brilliantly warm weather over the last few weeks, whereas last year, horrendously snowy weather. But I will tell you, the 6 weeks to the 10th of March, 2019, the like-for-likes up 9.6%. But there is a but here in that, and the but is the fact that margin and operating profit has decreased. Operating profit decreased by 14.2%. Operating margin was 7.1%, but the same period last year, it was 8.9%. Profit before tax and exceptional items decreased by 18%. So here you can see sales very, very strong. Profit coming off a little bit as well. But one of the key factors here is labour. And the cost increases. Labour up 33 million, repairs up 3.7, and the rest isn't worth thinking about. It's the labour side of things. And I will tell you that our guest host for the next 2 hours has joined us, and that is Giles Keating, who is a director at Werstein. Good morning to you. I always feel like I have to say Werstein in a certain kind of very loud Germanic way. Good morning to you, my friend. This is a fascinating company with a fascinating man who we know that Tim's a Brexiteer. He has led the clarion call for we'll be okay after Brexit as well. But labour costs going up. Do you think that's a direct correlation with perhaps less people from the continent wanting to come to the UK and hence putting more pressure on labour?
Look, clearly the labour market in the UK is hot. And it seems to me that really the Weatherspoon figures, you see that on both sides of the equation. Revenues are up, reflecting the fact that people do have discretionary spending power, but costs are up because the labour market is tight. Brexit's one element in that.
Well, thank you. Look, I'm delighted to say Tim Martin is good now, the CEO of JD Weatherspoon. And Tim, look, rightly so, you took me to task being a journalist telling you that you were preoccupied with Brexit last time round. I remember our conversation vividly. So let me, well, for a start, apologise for that. It's not for me to do that to you. But let me just say, the like-for-likes look great, but you have got diminished margins and operating profit coming down. Is it anything to do with Brexit, Tim, and those labour costs going up?
I don't think it is really. It's a function of the fact that we've got lower unemployment than we've had ever since I started in business. So lowest unemployment for 40 years. And naturally that puts up wages. Also, it's important not to over-concentrate on one 6-month period, because we probably could have, if we pulled out all the stops, got our profits at higher levels. But having been on the stock market for 26, 27 years, I think it's better to take the costs sometimes and let sales do the work for you over the ensuing months or years. So you shouldn't always try to align costs and profits to ensure higher profits in every period. It's very tempting to do that on the stock market, but it's quite a dangerous thing.
Tim, you're in esteemed company. When I read reports, they're normally dull as ditchwater, but people like Martin Sorrell and Michael O'Leary always have something interesting in there, as do you as well. And you've gone to task here, taking on the CBI, the Bank of England, the Times, the FT, the Economist, who all favoured Remain in your point here. You're saying actually that their forecasts are way too gloomy. You're still standing by that, aren't you?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it's been a pitched a political battle, and all those sides were on one side of the politics, and their entire case was based on not on the fact that we've been more democratic outside the EU, but on the fact that we go to hell in a handcar if we tried to leave. Whereas the wisdom from looking around the world is that democracy.
We haven't asked you a direct question about this, but maybe just give us your view. What do you make of what's happened this last week and the fact that we're now heading into a further third successive vote next Tuesday on the same package of measures that were agreed by the Prime Minister with the EU?
Well, my view, it's state union indefinitely and still subject to European rules. I just read the former Australian Prime Minister describe it as a tethered goat. To reject that deal, that it will implement the decision of the people repeatedly. It's reluctant to do so because most of the parliamentarians are actually Remainers, but they have to do
some of the numbers with you. And I want to take you to food because I know you've spent quite a bit of time and effort bulking up on the food side of the business, presenting a menu that is appealing. And what you've got now is a slight increase in your sales numbers and also the contribution to overall earnings. Can you just talk us through what you're seeing there?
Well, when we put on the stock market, our food sales were something like £500 a week in 1992, and now they're around £15,000 per week per pub. So it's become a very important part of our business, as it has for many pubs. And we've opened for breakfast a few years ago. We started selling cappuccinos a few years before that. And we're trying to do everything we can to make food available during long hours as a very important contributor to our profits. I think that's the way the world's going in pubs.
Can I ask you then, if we do get past some of the Brexit chaos that we've seen, there's been an indication, at least from Mark Carney, that there may be some upside to consumption here in the UK. Do you think that's happening? Do you think some of those consumers are being held back and suddenly there might be this magic that occurs across the UK where suddenly people are spending money at the pubs and on food again down the track if there is some certainty around Brexit?
Well, oddly enough, the discussion is taking place as if more and higher levels of investment are the holy grail. In fact, most of the problems since I've been in business in the last 40 years have been as a result of excessive consumption, excessive borrowing, and excessive Brexit, is to be able to eliminate tariffs on over 12,000 items, which includes many food items. So instead of free trade with the 7% of the world that's in the EU, you can get free trade with 100% of the world by eliminating the tariffs. So at the moment, we buy 6 or 8 million bottles of wine from Australia and New Zealand, and it's subject to a tariff. That can be eliminated. We can reduce prices, good for consumers.
Tim, just before we let you go, I just want to talk about some shifting trends. You've obviously gone down the vegan path and you've put your vegan full English out there, but I see a lot of criticism on social media. Would you eat it?
Well, I would eat vegetarian meals. Vegan's probably going a bit strong, but I think that if people criticize a particular dish on our menu, and this is why we've gone from one pub to 900, what we'll do is we'll take the criticism on board and try and improve it. Sometimes it's valid criticism, sometimes it isn't. I'm not on social media myself, thank goodness, so I have to tell me this.
Tim, thank you very much indeed for your time. As I'm looking at a great piece quoting Warren Buffett on corporate governance. We'll get to that next time as well. It's in your copy there. Tim Martin, the CEO of JD Wetherspoon and well-known prominent corporate Brexiteer. Thank you very much indeed. Charles, I just mentioned corporate governance. I don't want to bore our viewers, but this is interesting. He's made it interesting. It says, as Warren Buffett has said, it's easy to criticize corporate governance rules, but more difficult to see what to replace them with. Basically, Tim's going to task about non-executive directors and saying it's ludicrous that there are rules which mean basically, in effect, you have to change these after 9 years, I think it is as well. He said, for example, some of the major banks in the UK effectively became insolvent in the global financial crisis and that. And actually, under the current rules, you wouldn't have any experience from that glass financial crisis on the board now as well. Do you think there are some problems with corporate governance?
It's an ongoing issue. And I think the thing about the 9-year rule, you can certainly debate that both ways. I think in the banks and financial institutions, the obligations that directors face are really quite horrendous. Yeah. And I think that really narrows the talent pool that's interesting. So it's a difficult area.
Say that. It's a narrow old talent pool anyway. And one of my biggest bête noirs, so to speak, pain in the butt, I was going to say, but I won't say that on air, is the fact that you can have all these wonderful people, very smart people, loads of non-executive directors running companies over here, doing this over there. I'm sorry, I can only do one job, and moderately effectively. I'll let the viewers decide on that as well. How is it that these people can run a bank? They can become a non-exec on an insurance company. They can run some arts foundations. I'm sorry, I think it's ludicrous.
I think some non-execs do take on too many roles. That's clear. I think a lot of them are very, very hardworking and do manage to do it effectively. But yeah, there is a temptation to take too many on.
We'll come back, Giles. We'll talk some more in just a moment. Let's update you on the latest from New Zealand. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has said 40 people are dead following shootings at 2 mosques in Christchurch. 3 men and 1 woman have been arrested, and the city remains in lockdown. And authorities say they cannot assume the attack is contained to Christchurch. Many world leaders have denounced the attacks which targeted Muslims during Friday prayers. Ardern strongly condemned the act of terrorism.
It's clear that this is one of New Zealand's darkest days. Clearly, what has happened here is an extraordinary and unprecedented act of violence. There is no place in New Zealand for such acts of extreme and unprecedented violence, which it is clear this act was.
Coming up on the show, we dive into the details of China's new foreign investment law and whether it's enough to end the trade war.
CNBC's Global CFO Council.
It seems to me that the business community globally is refocusing on the opportunity in Asia and emerging.
We get 19, 20% in Latin America. We're seeing similar numbers in Asia Pacific. Even in some of the more mature economies, we're still seeing significant growth. In Europe and the US, you have to get used to 2s, 3s currently.
CNBC's Global CFO Council.
High-growth companies need to ask themselves, what is the right path to accelerate growth?
EY has taken the time to really understand the challenges that we're facing and our vision for the future. Veridesk is a company that has evolved to offer a full suite of office products to develop fast, flexible workspaces.
Veridesk is building something incredible, and we are extremely proud to be a trusted business advisor.
My role at CNBC is to be the eyes and ears on the trading floor for investors. Interest rates are the lifeblood of the U.S. economy. My focus on Fed Day is to watch the markets because it's all about the market reaction. A quarter-point hike, there's a recalibration going on. It happens instantaneously. Dollar index gets the trophy for making the biggest move. The markets aren't a job for me. They're my passion, keeping it real in real time.
Unilever has missed fourth quarter sales expectations with underlying growth at 2.9%.
We expect growth to be more in the 3 to 4% range, basically on the volatility in emerging markets, notably Latin America.
It was a great quarter, a great year for L'Oreal, and the boom in China, the boom in luxury continues.
For the moment, all markets are on the same rhythm, and we hope again to accelerate our market share.
Nestle shares called to open higher after full year sales topped expectations.
Not only did they reach 3%.
The organic growth performance in 2018, in particular the strong second half and the strong fourth quarter.
BP reported a 65% jump in its fourth quarter net profit, beating expectations.
It feels like the markets will be firmer. Couldn't predict the oil price. We're planning BP between 50 and 65.
The stories and opportunities driving Wall Street and investors. Tyler Matheson, Melissa Lee, Kelly Evans, Power Lunch, weekdays on CNBC.
Welcome back, everybody. Just want to update you on some news on travel arrangements in and out of and in New Zealand itself. Air New Zealand this morning has been cancelling a number of regional services to Christchurch this evening. The company says that any customers affected will, if they still want to travel, be rebooked on the next available service. Obviously, there is going to be an impact at the airport as well. Screenings from Christchurch Airport will continue due to security screening processes in place, but I think it's probably just wise if you are heading to New Zealand or planning to travel out of New Zealand that you think about extra time as a result of increased security checks after this tragic attack that seems to have claimed 40 lives so far. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin has ruled out a trade summit between Presidents Trump and Xi at the end of this month. Speaking after his testimony to the Senate Finance Committee, Mnuchin said U.S. and Chinese negotiators are working as quickly as possible, adding he is pleased with the negotiator.
We'll have news on China probably one way or the other. We're going to know over the next 3 to 4 weeks. And if that one gets done, it will be something that people are going to be talking about for a long time. And because we have been really taken advantage of for a long time. And now I think China, frankly, they've been very responsible and very reasonable.
Chinese Premier Li Keqiang has also expressed hope for U.S. trade talks. Speaking at his annual National People's Congress Meet the Press event, Li said common interests far outweigh disputes between the two countries. Eunice joins us now with more both on the new foreign investment law and, of course, where we're going on growth. Eunice.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Well, the premier also addressed, as you had said, the trade conflict between the U.S. and China and said that he hoped that the two sides would be able to overcome their differences to produce a good trade deal. He also specifically and directly attempted to ease concerns among its trading partners that Beijing could use technology of Chinese firms such as Huawei to spy on other countries. This is what he said.
Let me tell you explicitly that this is not consistent with Chinese law. This is not how China behaves. We did not do that and will not do that in the future.
But the main event today was really the passage of the new foreign investment law, because it's being seen as possibly an attempt by Beijing to say that it's willing to make some compromises on a trade deal with Washington in a very highly unusual move. The new draft law was revised quickly last minute to include some language that addresses long-standing concerns among international companies, such as IP theft. So one of the big complaints within the international business community has been that when the companies need to introduce a new product or open up a new factory, that they go up against these government-led review boards, and that those review boards are often given a lot of proprietary information that then sometimes is leaked to a Chinese competition, or at least that is a suspicion among foreign firms. So now this new law addresses some of those concerns, barring officials from divulging trade secrets and then threatening them with criminal prosecution. So the American business community has been pleased with this new development. They say that this acknowledges their concerns in law. At the same time, though, of course, as it's always the case in China, there's still a big question about implementation. The premier, though, did address that particular concern, saying that China would roll out accompanying rules to make the new law operable. Now, on the economy, China's premier, who counts the economy as part of his portfolio, had also unveiled more information about the measures to help stabilize growth. So he had said that the biggest tool they're going to use is their cuts to taxes as well as fees. And specifically, he said that the previously announced value-added tax cuts would kick in April, and social insurance reductions would start in May. Guys?
Eunice, thank you very much. In other news, UBS has said the year started differently than planned, quote, making this year's journey towards our target steeper. The warning came as the Swiss bank lowered its 2018 net profit after bolstering its litigation provisions by almost $400 million. Switzerland's biggest lender is appealing a French court ruling that fined the company 4.5 billion euros for tax fraud last month. Shares in UBS are trading lower in pre-market trade. Deutsche Bank has reportedly entered negotiations over a potential merger with rival Commerzbank. Earlier this week, German Finance Minister Olaf Scholz also told reporters that there are, quote, talks about the situation. Let's get out to Annette for more in Berlin, where she's attending a Deutsche Bank event that will feature the lender's chairman, Paul Achleitner, and the CDU leader, AKK. Let's get out to Annette. I want to ask you about some of the opposition that still stands, because every time we talk about this deal, there seems to be a shortage of supporters, and it seems now as though unions are also lining up against a merger.
Yeah, the unions are very vocally against that merger, because we have recently heard from a consultancy who was informing the Bundestag Parliament that a merger could cost up to 30,000 jobs when you were to combine those banks. Clearly, the trade unions, which are represented in the boards of both banks, because that's German law, are vocally against it. So we'll see how that whole thing pans out, because clearly also that a consultancy is now informing the Bundestag Parliament lawmakers that it only would make sense if we had cost cuts of up to 6 billion euros, and also potentially a capital hike of 3 to 4 billion euros. It makes it quite clear that the opposition is gaining momentum on forming a united front against that deal. Having said that, so what's next? I'm hearing that the supervisory boards of both banks are going to meet next Thursday to discuss the topic, and then the aim is to actually come to an official communication whether the merger will go ahead or not until Easter. So there's still some time for discussion and also looking into the implementation. The regulators are very strict about it. That's what I hear. They want to have a precise plan how the implementation of a potential merger will happen, and they want to exclude any execution risk. So today's event will be interesting insofar that all these policymakers will be present. Paul Achleitner is speaking, AKK is speaking, and the topic will be more or less Germany's role in Europe, but clearly the elephant in the room will be Deutsche Bank and Commerzbank. Back to you.
Annette, thank you very much indeed for that. Giles Keating is with us, director at Bernstein. Giles, let me just ask you, do you think the Federal Reserve is going to hike interest rates at all this year?
My feeling is still yes, they will before the end of the year. I think that US labor market is slowly, well, it's tightening, right? I mean, wages are accelerating, and, you know, at the last payroll numbers, employment largely didn't go up because there aren't that many people left to employ.
As you know, the market has had a much better tone since it perceived the Fed backing away from further tightening of conditions. So are you comfortable that we will see a rebound in growth expectations through the rest of this year on some of this more relaxed view from central banks?
I mean, you know, to say the market's feeling more comfortable, I mean, the market was falling very, very sharply, both equities and high yield bonds. And then we got Powell coming with his dovish stance. So it was a major help to markets. And clearly he has to stay dovish for another 6 months. But I do believe the growth will come through. But at the end of the day, I think their hands will be forced as that labor market tightens.
Okay, we'll take the break. We'll be back in just a moment. In terms of how we're poised session this morning, we do have green. These are figured here as the DAX, where we're up 0.2% as we come into the beginning of the European trading day. We've still got 33 minutes until the markets open. We'll be back in just a moment. Stay with us.
Each day, our planet awakens with signs of opportunity. But with opportunity comes risk. And to manage this risk, the world turns to CME Group. We help farmers lock in future prices, bank rate changes, and airlines hedge fuel costs, all so they can manage their risks and move forward. It's simply a matter of following the signs. They all lead here. CME Group, how the world advances.
Here we are a year later, worrying about the growth outlook.
Last year when we were here, the sky was the limit.
Sun is still shining, but we're seeing those clouds coming much closer.
There's a high likelihood of a significant slowing in 2020.
We've seen it in the UK. We're potentially seeing some of that globally now.
The assumptions we integrated into our macroeconomic forecast were already quite prudent and not very upbeat.
Truculent U.S. policies don't serve their purposes.
This has become prolonged and it's become ugly.
Nobody can have an interest in a further slowdown.
The business community are more measured. They are closer to the coalface.
America always manages somehow to pick itself up.
President Trump wants to be re-elected next year, so I think he will strike a deal somewhere down the road this year.
It's a less volatile market than some of the other commodities.
No recession, but a slowdown.
There's nothing wrong with the slowdown. I think people and markets seem to have forgotten. They're okay, you know.
On the next, Managing Asia, saving the planet through architecture.
Now it is a race and rescue mission. If we don't do something about it now, there won't be that many next generations to survive our generation. If we were to integrate our built environment with the natural environment, then our buildings and our cities must be like nature.
World-renowned green architect Ken Young, Managing Asia.
If you look at our debt to GDP ratio for the overall economy, that is, in the 140, 150% debt to GDP, and that includes all kinds of debt. If you look at other large economies around the world, their debt to GDP ratios are much higher, 200%, 300% in some cases. So they are.
Open Exchange West Africa, proudly brought to you by InterSwitch, transaction solutions you can depend on.
Welcome to Open Exchange West Africa. We are coming to you live from Lagos, Nigeria's commercial capital, where the weather is partly cloudy this Friday morning. I am Wale Famirewa, and thank you for joining us. Coming up, Togo's Prime Minister Komi Selom Klaso speaks on the purpose of the country's national development plan, and later we discuss the bank's role in empowering women entrepreneurs in Nigeria. And also on the program, we discuss the growth of Nigeria's advertising industry. As always, you can join the conversation by following us on Twitter at CNBC Africa and me at Wale Famrewa. And don't forget to use the hashtag OEWA410. But first, these are your headlines from West Africa. Nigerian officials have called off the search and rescue efforts at the site of the collapsed building where an unknown number of people were trapped. Nigeria's National Emergency Management Agency said workers had reached the foundation of the collapsed building and did not expect to find more people. Families kept a vigil at a hospital on Thursday for children pulled from the wreckage as rescue operations came to an end after the last body was brought out around 3 a.m. There have been conflicting figures about the survivors, as most of the emergency agencies have declined to clarify the numbers. Building collapses are frequent in Nigeria, where regulations are poorly enforced and construction materials are often substandard. The World Bank and the African Development Bank have committed more than $47 billion by 2025 to help African countries tackle the effects of climate change. In a statement, the World Bank said it had pledged $22.5 billion between 2021 and 2025, and the funding would include projects in Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Kenya. Meanwhile, the AFDB said it had committed $25 billion to climate finance in 2020 and 2025. That the funds would be used to increase investment in energy projects. Nigerian Business Council, PEBEC, has launched the reportgov.ng app, which is an official public service feedback and complaints platform to support business climate reforms implemented by the council since 2016. The platform, which is also a website, will facilitate the escalation and resolution of issues encountered with ministries, departments, and agencies towards ensuring a more business-friendly environment in the country. And those are the top headlines in West Africa. CNBC Africa Africa's Esther Awuni caught up with Iona Aguele Trimnell, the W Initiative, and they discussed the needs for banks to support women entrepreneurs in Nigeria. This was on the sidelines of the International Women's Day Conference.
Events like this are extremely significant, especially for women. Women don't always have the opportunity for networking. A lot of us are running home to look after our children, our husbands, our parents. So women don't have the opportunity like men. When they leave work, they can go to a bar, they can sit down and watch football and network with their friends. So conferences like this offer women an opportunity to actually network. You get a chance not only meet other women who are doing similar businesses, you get encouraged and you get inspired. We've brought people from all over Africa. Women really do, as an entrepreneur, you need to know what other women are doing. You need to feed off what the opportunity, and so absolutely important.
Speaking about opportunities, innovation, women. Entrepreneurs, what are those opportunities that you see women in our environment harnessing to at the same time?
Well, you can be innovative in any industry. I mean, we focus on 8 industries, and IT, manufacturing, catering, fashion, entertainment, and a couple others. So you can be innovative. It's so competitive right now, especially with social media. You've only got a couple of seconds to grab someone's attention. Two, you're coming from a disadvantage, but not all of us have the resources to actually build up a large niche to get markets. The light bulb that goes in your head, you might think is a silly idea, but especially in Nigeria with 180 million, the opportunities are there. Now, how you harness that is a different ball game. And being innovative, being different, finding your niche, understanding who you're.
What do you think? We should see more of that.
I think we're going to see more of that. I mean, Access Bank has come out as the leader, and that's because we have a woman's champion at the helm. So he's given us the opportunity, and those of us who work for him, and said, "You guys bring your own women in. You can't say that we're not helping. You two, you do something and bring these women in and offer them these services." But I think it's very easy to replicate all of this, and I think the competition will be helpful to women. So one day your interest rates are 15% or 17%. You never know. I think even government will make some funding more available so we can have competitive rates for women. And then even something like removing collateral, which is one of the stumbling blocks for women getting loans. So that has been yanked off by Access Bank. So guess what? Women can access up to 20 million naira without having to come up with a collateral or with landed property. So the opportunities, and I think banks have to do the hard work. You want over 50% of the population. You want our market, you want our business. So you go out there and make sure you provide the kind of services and products that speak to us. If not, we won't bank with you. It's just really that simple. And I think Access Bank has come out as the leader, honestly. And we're going to put our money where our mouth is. We're going to provide the right services. We're going to provide some concessionary rates and less about it. Competitive to do it.
And speaking on the purpose of the National Development Plan of Togo, the country's Prime Minister Komi Selom Klaso says the NDP will make Togo a hub of logistical excellence and a leading does this and more.
NDP, please allow me to summarize in a few words what the NDP is, the National Development Plan for our country.
Pour notre pays.